humanity sends the first space expedition to Mars, which mysteriously perishes. Rescuers struggle to reach the red planet and discover an astonishing find that reveals the secret of the origin of humans and life on Earth.
I don't know what the hell we just did.
A party is held at the house of astronaut Luke Graham in honor of his departure to Mars. Families of his friends and colleagues gather, and the man says goodbye to those staying behind, including his friend Jim McConnell, who had long been preparing for this flight but had to leave the project due to his wife's illness. The friends wish Luke a safe flight and remember the deceased woman. She would have been happy that the mission takes place. In 2020, the first manned expedition arrives on the red planet. Soon people discover a strange white formation near the base in the Cydonia region, which they suspect is the extrusion of a layer of water which will be useful for future human colonization. Transmitting the news of the find to the command center aboard the International Space Station, 4 crew members head to the location of the formation for further research. Arriving on site, people see a tall mountain which radar identifies as metallic. Then the astronauts begin to hear a strange low sound, but they think is just interference from their Mars rover. And when they increase the power of their equipment, the sand beneath their feet starts to move. At first, this doesn't cause much concern. The astronauts stay in place, examining the mountain, above which a sand whirlwind is growing. But soon it begins to behave like a sentient being, seemingly examining the newcomers and then attacking them, killing 3 astronauts within seconds, and then emitting a powerful electromagnetic pulse, destroying most of the working electronics aboard the ship. After the whirlwind subsides, a huge human face carved out of dense material appears from under the layer of sand. The space station receives an unintelligible message from Luke, but they do not understand what happened and whether Luke is alive. The leadership realizes that the rescue expedition needs to be organized, but how this can be done technically is unclear. Then Jim proposes a solution to the problem, as he had developed plans for evacuation from Mars. The station commander agrees to consider it but opposes Jim's participation in the expedition because the man refused to undergo tests and left the project. Woody Blake insists on including his friend in the crew, as his refusal to go on the first flight was for a good reason. He was very worried about his wife. Moreover, it was he and his wife who studied and designed the flight to Mars. So Jim knows more about this planet than everyone else, which will undoubtedly help in the rescue mission. Hearing his arguments, the commander agrees, and the rescue ship with a team of 4 people heads to Mars. In addition to Woody and Jim, the crew includes specialist Terry Fisher, Woody's wife, and Phil Ohlmeyer. Along the way, Jim kindly envies the love between Woody and Terry, observing how tenderly they treat each other. Soon, the surface of Mars becomes visible from the ship, and people note that the expedition camp is intact, and even see 3 burial mounds next to the building. It is unclear what happened to Luke. Maybe there was simply no one to bury him. Soon, a magnetic storm covers the planet, and the astronauts can no longer see anything. Command gives permission to land. Woody goes to share the news with Jim and catches him watching a family movie from which it becomes clear that his wife was also an astronaut, and together with her husband, they dreamed of flying to Mars. The ship is preparing to enter orbit around the red planet, but then a swarm of micrometeorites appears in its path, and one of the meteorites punctures the hull, injuring Phil's arm. The station begins to lose air, and Woody goes into open space to find and fix the breach. However, the breach is so small that it cannot be visually detected, and then Terry squeezes out juice which floats to the hole and seeps through it, indicating the breach. However, the crew does not notice another breach in the fuel line of one of the main engines. When the engine ignites, the fuel displaced into space explodes, destroying the ship. The crew has no choice but to quickly don their spacesuits and venture out into open space, hoping to maneuver to the supply module left in orbit from the first expedition. They find the module, but it is moving on a lower orbit than theirs, and too fast. Woody uses up all the fuel in his rocket pack to reach the module and secures a rope to it. However, he fails to stop his own flight and continues to fall towards Mars. Terry, wanting to save her husband, detaches her rope and goes after him. But Woody, realizing that if she continues to try to save him, she will face certain death, removes his helmet and perishes. Crying, Terry watches her husband's body fall to the planet and then returns to the others. The three astronauts land on the planet using the module. Although the module itself will not be able to take off again, the rescuers brought with them new motherboards for the first expedition ship, replacing the burnt-out ones. Upon arriving at the base of the first expedition, they explore it, but find no one. Although the living quarters are completely intact, Jim goes to the greenhouse and is amazed that all the plants are doing well, everything is functioning and working. The astronaut removes his helmet, and in the reflection on the water he sees Luke with an axe attacking him, not believing that this is a real person, not a vision. The man is seized, and only then does he begin to believe that they have come for him. The astronauts understand that Luke is not entirely mentally stable, as he has spent more than a year on Mars in complete isolation from the world. After recovering from the sandstorm attack, he buried the deceased and began studying the strange structure. He shows the rescue team the video recording of the discovery that cost his crew members their lives, and people are astonished, realizing that they are looking at the face of a humanoid. He then demonstrates his most important find, a recording of the sound he heard near the formation. After several months of analyzing the sound, he understood that it represents a diagram of human DNA on a rectangular coordinate system in space. Someone left it here as their signature. But later, remembering how Phil created the DNA of his ideal lover from candy, Jim realizes that this is not a signature. In reality, it is a peculiar test left by the creators instead of a lock guarding the entrance to somewhere. It turns out that the first expedition perished because they answered incorrectly. Instead of complementing the DNA proving that they were humans, the astronauts directed radar at the face. Since the answer was wrong, the structure's security system, the sandstorm, destroyed the intruders. The team heads to the Sphinx, but first they send a robot and transmit a signal with the supplemented DNA through it. A bright light shines from an entrance that appears in the face. Everyone except Phil, who stays behind to fix the ship, goes to the face. Jim gives Phil the order to take off at a precisely determined time, even if they don't return. Then the people enter a white room, the door closes, and the astronauts lose contact with the ship. Soon the room fills with Earth's atmosphere, and the people remove their helmets. Immediately behind them, another airlock opens, and upon passing through it, the astronauts find themselves in a dark room where they see a massive three-dimensional projection of the solar system. Then a hologram of a Martian appears, silently explaining to the people that in the distant past, a massive asteroid struck Mars, destroying the planet's ecosystem, which strongly resembled the Earth's. The Martians had to evacuate their race to other star systems, but they also sent a ship from Mars to neighboring Earth, containing the seeds of future life. Hundreds of millions of years later, multicellular plants and animals appeared on the planet, and no one could explain how it happened. Many years have passed since this panspermia. The new forms that emerged from the sent DNA evolved and became humans. They were supposed to return home to Mars one day so that the Sphinx would recognize them as the descendants of the grandiose experiment. The hologram reaches out to the Earthling, conveying that they belong to the same species. The Martian hologram disappears, and in front of them opens the hatch of a spaceship, on which someone from them can fly to the new home of the Martians. At this time, Phil unsuccessfully tries to contact his friends and prepares for takeoff. The people hear his warning that the storm is getting stronger and will soon engulf the ship. They realize that they need to hurry. But Jim refuses to return to Earth when the opportunity to fly to another galaxy arises. He is sure that this is an invitation and he was born precisely to reach the new world. Jim says goodbye to his friends. Terry gives him a small rocket pendant to remember, which once belonged to Woody, and the astronauts leave. Meanwhile, Phil repeats the call, but not receiving an answer, he hesitates to press the launch button. And Jim enters a light elevator that lifts him onto the Martian ship. The two remaining astronauts barely make it back to the ship due to the sandstorm, and only because Phil, contrary to the order, delays the takeoff. Meanwhile, Jim steps onto a circle that appears before him and suddenly realizes that he can't move as water rises around him. The man braces himself for drowning and holds his breath, but then he takes a breath and starts breathing underwater. He smiles, understanding that this is a new form of life. Images of his past life flash before his eyes, and the man seems to say goodbye to everyone once again. His crew, having taken off, watches through the porthole as the Martian ship with Jim on board flies away at high speed toward a distant galaxy and wishes him a safe journey. This good, kind-hearted science fiction film that was shot many years ago does not stand out for its dynamic plot, but despite numerous scientific inaccuracies, it is interesting to watch and keeps the tension until the last seconds.
They are heroes, and they're going to space.
In 1963, the Cold War between the USA and the USSR intensifies, and nuclear war seems inevitable. Understanding that humanity could be wiped off the face of the earth, President John Kennedy orders the development of a secret plan to ensure humanity's survival. A group of scientists creates the spaceship Ascension and selects 600 volunteers who are sent to Proxima Centauri with the task of colonizing the planet. But the journey will take hundreds of years, meaning generations will succeed one another. 2 generations later, the ship is mainly inhabited by the grandchildren of the first astronauts, and the environment reflects the 1960s. In honor of the 51st anniversary of the launch, a grand party is held on the ship. Looking at the inhabitants, it seems the mission has been successful. People have obviously adapted to the living conditions. However, the first impression is deceptive, as social inequality exists here too. Wealthy and well-off families get good jobs and live on the upper decks, while the poor are limited in comfort. One day, a young woman named Lorelei picks up a package from the butcher and goes to swim on the artificial beach. But shortly afterward, a girl named Krista finds her lifeless body and alerts the ship with a loud scream. Despite the passing years, the chief engineer of the spaceship, who remained on Earth, is still alive. But now his place is taken by his son, Harris, who does everything to keep the Ascension project under tight security and monitors all news. Learning of Lorelei's death, Harris's assistant advises informing the project director, Catherine Warren. However, Harris fears that this could jeopardize the project and tarnish his father's legacy. Meanwhile, Dr. Juliette Bryce examines the dead body and finds strange marks on the deceased's wrists. The ship's captain, William, assigns the responsibility for investigating this case to the project executive director, Aaron Gall. He soon discovers one oddity: there is no image of Lorelei entering the beach. Later, Galt learns that Lorelei was seeing a guy named James Toback, who worked in water purification. He sets out to find him, but to no avail. On the same day, the forensic results show that Lorelei had been making love a few hours before her death. A bullet was extracted from her palate. This alarms Galt, since officially there are no weapons on board the ship. He immediately informs the captain of the news. Meanwhile, Krista has to be hospitalized, as she is shocked by the incident and says someone is watching her. But even as she begins to recover, the girl insists that there is no life in space, so they must return to Earth. She is also sure that Lorelei died because she learned something forbidden. Soon, Galt apprehends James Toback. The guy admits he saw Lorelei on the day of her death. However, she left abruptly after a quarrel, and he was not close to her that day. Galt and Toback go to the beach and start searching for clues. Suddenly, they stumble upon a hidden passageway that Lorelei apparently used, explaining her absence on the surveillance footage. Galt and Officer Duke inspect the discovered entrance and find the place where the girl was killed, as well as a book with maps of the water filtration system and blueprints of the navigation computer, which recently malfunctioned. It becomes clear that this is sabotage, intended to force the ship to return to Earth. Duke and his men descend to the lower decks, where the Butcher Stokes provokes a fight, but then an alarm sounds about an approaching powerful radiation storm. The order is given for everyone to take shelter in their capsules, but then the captain learns that the protective shields are jammed and sends Galt and an electrician to fix them. Thanks to their efforts, the door eventually closes. The electrician then confesses that he saw Stokes giving Lorelei a gun before she was killed. At the same time, Dr. Juliette puts Krista to bed and leaves her a seahorse-shaped necklace, claiming it will protect her. However, when the spaceship enters the radiation zone and everyone seals themselves in their capsules, Krista sees a strange man in a suit entering her room. After the ship safely passes through the radiation storm and everyone is allowed to exit, Galt and Duke go to the lower deck again, find a gun with Stokes, and take him into custody. The man is interrogated, but he continues to insist that he was framed because he is from the lower deck and it is easy to make him the culprit. Meanwhile, the door to Stokes' cell automatically opens. He exits and retrieves a hidden gun from his cabin. After the funeral, Galt speaks to the captain. William admits that he was close to Lorelei, but he did not kill her. It is then that Stokes appears, taking a random girl hostage. he demands a fair trial. Galt lunges at Stokes, freeing the girl. The captain quickly leads her to safety, while Stokes and Galt continue to fight. In the end, Stokes is ejected into space, but instead of instant death, he lands on an inflatable mattress where a group of people detains him. It becomes clear that the entire project is just a simulation, a test of the viability of generations of people in spaceflight. But the people on the ship believe they were sent on an important mission and have been flying in space for 51 years. Director Warren somehow learns about the recent events. Enraged, she storms into the Mission Control Center and warns Harris not to hide anything. Harris claims that Stokes is the murderer, but the director is not convinced, and she sends a consultant named Samantha Kruger to oversee the project. At the same time, an unknown man sets a bomb in the ship's cobalt generator, which explodes after some time. Harris and Kruger rush into the facility housing the spaceship. Fortunately, there are no reports of casualties, and the injured are taken to the medical center. Captain William inspects the explosion site and discovers graffiti on the wall, confirming it was a deliberate act. But fearing accusations of incompetence, he conceals the true cause. Outside, Kruger demands access to the surveillance footage. On the ship, Galt goes to the lower decks to meet with the person responsible for the generators, named Dwight, but he panics and attacks the director. Regaining consciousness, Galt continues the investigation and learns that the explosion that killed his parents 20 years ago was similar to the recent one. He hypothesizes that Dwight was likely involved in Lorelai's murder because Stokes didn't know how to use a gun, therefore he couldn't have killed the girl. Harris and his assistant learn that the other side of the deck is no longer airtight, and the team inside can hear sounds from outside. This creates a risk of exposure. Galt finds Dwight and a fight ensues, during which Dwight somehow manages to escape and start a bomb timer. Alarmed, Harris orders everyone to leave the area immediately. Fortunately, Galt manages to defuse the bomb, but Dwight dies. Kruger blames Harris for this, but he argues the goal of the project is to determine human capabilities. However, later Harris gives Dr. Juliet's necklace to his wife, indicating that he was the one who broke into Krista's room and stole the necklace. At the same time, Kruger begins her own investigation and discovers that several scientists involved in the Ascension project were found dead or went missing in the 1960s. Meanwhile, on the ship, everyone prepares for the next round of vaccinations, but Krista refuses the shot, convinced that they want to kill her. The librarian volunteers to take the shot instead, but after receiving the medication, she loses consciousness. Kruger demands an explanation, but Harris insists that these are routine immunizations and is concerned for the girl who didn't get the shot. He orders the medicine to be added to milk, but Krista figures out his plan and pours it out. Kruger meets with Eva, the author of a website tracking the fates of 1960s scientists. Eva claims the government used the project as a cover to abduct children for participation. Later, an unknown man pursues Krista and tries to forcibly vaccinate her, but he injures himself and stains the girl's dress with his blood, allowing her to escape. Galt takes her to Dr. Juliet and convinces her to get the shot. While preparing, Krista tells Dr. Robert Bryce about visions she's had lately. These include falling from a twin tower, a war in the desert, and tragedies in the ocean. She also claims to have seen Dr. Bryce in the maintenance tunnel where Lorelai was killed. The doctor becomes enraged, gags her, and administers the shot. Harris and his assistant, who saw this, are shocked that Krista described events that actually happened on Earth. Dr. Bryce finds a blood sample match from Krista's dress with his wife's student, Mesmer. However, the boy is found dead in his cabin. Kruger concludes that Harris has an accomplice on the ship who is causing disturbances and radiation storms. On the ship, the day of the lottery arrives, allowing the winning couple to have a child. Since population numbers must be strictly maintained, a new person can only appear after someone's death. And now 3 people have died. Soon the names are announced. Among the winners are Officer Duke and his wife. Krista notices a woman outside her cabin and follows her, but suddenly she realizes it's the ghost of Lorelai. At that moment, someone starts playing a video showing her tryst with Captain William. Everyone in the room laughs while Krista starts screaming uncontrollably. Harris observes this and notices that the girl began reacting even before the video played, as if she could see the future. He is amazed. His father predicted this phenomenon in 3 generations and called it morphic resonance. Kruger steals the keys to Stokes' cell, later presenting a report sharply criticizing Harris, prompting Director Warren to come to the project. While Kruger sneaks into Stokes' cell, he attacks her and takes her hostage, and there he learns the truth about the Ascension project. This shocks Stokes, leading to a mental breakdown. However, Kruger persuades him that they must escape before they are noticed and killed. She is willing to help him because the entire project is unethical. As they step outside, Stokes cries, but Kruger urges him to pull himself together. A guard approaches them, and they team up to neutralize him. In the process, Kruger gets injured. Stokes goes to the nearest store to buy medical supplies. They then go to a motel together. Warren and Harris learn about the escape and call security from the company TC, which turns out to have funded the project. The management is unhappy with the director's work and accuses Harris of covering up facts. Harris panics and begs Warren for a second chance, but it is in vain. On the ship, Duke learns that Galt has started investigating his wife, suspecting her of killing Lorelei. He loses his temper and confronts Galt. At the same time, Krista has another vision. She foresees a violent fight between Duke and Galt and runs to the beach. Anxious, she unintentionally uses telekinesis. However, she loses control of her power and shuts down all the ship's electricity. Warren blames Harris for the incident and orders her henchmen to get rid of him. Terrified, Harris talks about morphic resonance. It turns out that Warren has long awaited this result. They rush to the control center and learn that all the ship's systems shut down due to a power surge, but the artificial stars still shine. Harris's father embedded the starlights in the ship's nuclear reactor to ensure the illusion's eternity. Harris suggests using the nuclear reactor to restore the system's functionality. Meanwhile, Toback receives a weak TV signal and informs Dr. Bryce. However, the latter sends the guy away under a flimsy pretext, then turns off the screen. It becomes clear that he is Harris's accomplice. Kruger meets with Eva and explains everything to her. She plans to flee abroad and seek asylum before exposing the project's deceit. Eva tries to dissuade her, and Kruger realizes that the journalist also works for the TC company. Eva confesses everything and shoots Kruger. Stokes manages to escape. The oxygen on the ship begins to run out. Captain William and Galt go to the lower decks to activate the carbon dioxide scrubbers and declare a radiation storm for the others to conserve oxygen. Harris concludes that the chances of getting the ship back to working condition are extremely low, so Warren decides to extract Krista before she suffocates. William and Galt realize the scrubbers are beyond repair, so they decide to clean the air manually. Krista senses someone coming to take her. Dr. Bryce confirms this, and when Krista accuses him of killing Lorelei, he confesses. The woman learned about the fake mission, and he couldn't allow the exposure. Galt and William successfully distribute lithium dioxide throughout the ship using large fans, restoring oxygen levels. At that moment, Warren's envoy arrives, and Dr. Bryce tries to stop him, but the brute easily brushes him aside and grabs Krista. Galt sees Lorelei's ghost, who leads him to Krista. It turns out he has also developed resonance. Galt attacks the thug. Krista uses her power again, making the opponents dissolve into thin air. Seeing all this, Warren panics and tries to contact the envoy by radio. She moves closer to the ship, and Harris takes advantage of the moment to push her down, killing her. Galt finds himself on an unknown planet. The idea is generally good, especially for fans of detective fiction, and one can't help but wonder, what if Earth is the same kind of spaceship, and all the people on the planet are participants in an experiment? An alien race from the depths of space colonizes Earth. Millions of people from around the world are sent to work in mines on other planets. Those left on Earth are controlled with implanted tracking chips and giant alien robots positioned around the perimeters of cities. Oh wow, you hear me? Ah! Chicago, 2019. The city is under martial law due to a massive alien attack on all major cities of the world. The Drummond family, a father, a mother, and their 2 sons, tries to leave the city, but all exits are blocked. When a police officer stops their car at one of the exits, the father presses the gas pedal and breaks through the blockade. Entering an exit tunnel, the man is forced to stop as the exit is blocked by aliens. Taken by surprise, the father freezes, although his wife asks him to turn around. Suddenly, an unknown pulse tears through both adults sitting in the front seats. The children, looking up, see an incomprehensible creature standing right in front of their car's hood. 9 years later, the world, having surrendered without a fight to the invaders, is completely under their control. The operation of vital productions, including power plants, has been restored everywhere. The aliens are called legislators because all laws and rules now come from them. Over the years since Earth's surrender, the aliens have forced humans to build suitable living spaces for them underground, called closed zones, where only high-ranking human officials are allowed entry. It became clear that the alien invasion aimed at Earth's resources, their extraction, and exportation led to huge social stratification. The rich, working for the aliens, continue to live well, while the poor have lost all guarantees, including education and healthcare. Police lawlessness thrives, and the deportation of all undesirable people from the planet has begun. The alien systems block all communication lines, so people know nothing about the life of other cities and countries. Amidst this wave, a resistance emerged, planning an attack on the closed zone in Chicago. But the plan failed, the zone was unharmed, and the fate of the rebels remains unknown, although the police assure that they were all eliminated. And this was supposed to be the first spark from which a flame would ignite. 9 years after the failed uprising in Chicago, the police monitor anyone who raises even the slightest suspicion. Detective William Mulligan reviews video recordings from Gabriel's apartment, whose brother Rafe died in the uprising and was posthumously named a hero of the resistance. The guy goes through his usual morning routines, then wakes up his girlfriend, showing her a photo taken on the other side of the lake, where visiting is now prohibited. But the girl does not want to believe in a change in their lives and asks not to invent the impossible. Gabe leaves the house where his friend, who has obtained and repaired a boat, is already waiting for him, so they can sail out of the city tonight. But Gabe reminds him that he is under round-the-clock surveillance. Meanwhile, Mulligan reviews the newspapers and sees an advertisement for the Phoenix fire suppression system, after which he goes to his old friend Jane, who now runs a brothel. At the entrance, he sees the Phoenix emblem on the wall and notices the police chief. The owner greets Mulligan as a good friend and hands him a gift box, mentioning the Donnans and their gifts. Returning to the police station, he shares his findings. Phoenix exists and is preparing something for the New World Masters, but his partner does not believe that anyone could have survived the last purge. At this time in the subway, two resistance members meet because the newspaper advertisement is a battle readiness order given by their leader, whom they call First. He has learned that there is an entrance to the zone through the stadium, and soon there will be a Unity Festival, which high-ranking aliens will attend. The only thing left is to infiltrate. The next day, Gabe goes to work, having passed through the recognition system, since every person now has an identifier chip inside. The guy works in a data restoration center where he views millions of private videos a day and checks browser history requests. He sends all the collected information to the Central Information Center and destroys the carriers. Later, he receives a cigarette containing an unknown substance from his colleague and hides it behind his ear. After work, Gabe exits to the outside with a crowd of other workers and sees arriving guards grab and lead away one of the women. At the same time, an alien transport ship is sending off another batch of people as slaves for the alien mines from Earth. And around the perimeter of the city stand giant alien robots to prevent people from escaping. Gabe goes to the boat but is horrified at the sight of the weapon in his friend's hands. If they get caught, they will be instantly destroyed. Their scuffle is interrupted by the appearance of Mulligan, who orders Gabe to get into his car. He reminds the boy that he was his father's partner and now asks not to repeat his brother's mistakes and make the right choice. Gabriel has no information about Phoenix, and he does not intend to snitch, so the conversation goes nowhere. Gabriel goes to the person he is supposed to sell the acquired cigarette to, but the potential client pushes the boy into his van and, putting on them special collars that jam the tracking chip signal, drives him to the center of a destroyed district, where in one of the surviving buildings, Gabe meets his living brother. After a joyful reunion, Rafe tells him that he is the only survivor from his group. Unknown to him, Craftsman removed his chip, and now he has joined a new group. He takes the cigarette and, giving his brother a large sum of money, orders him to leave the area because Phoenix plans to attack the invaders. The brothers argue about the necessity of the uprising, but Rafe is sure that as long as there is time to fight, they should fight. Gabriel then rushes into his apartment and hurriedly starts packing, convincing his girlfriend to join him. The girl tries to persuade the boy to stay, and seeing the money and learning that Rafe is alive, asks the boy to think carefully, as they could then be recorded as accomplices. The couple argues, unaware that the police are closely listening to their conversation. Gabe leaves alone, but immediately encounters Mulligan, who was following him. Gabriel runs away from Mulligan and hides in the secret passages underground. He puts on the remaining collar, and the aliens' drones do not lose sight of him. Mulligan returns to the station, where he has an entire room dedicated to Phoenix and notes that Rafe might be alive. At this time, Rafe's carrier pigeon reaches the recipient, and the information is passed along the chain to a secret IP center, where upon entering the received numbers, its worker displays Phoenix's target, an official who will gain access to the closed zone that day. The newspapers immediately publish Phoenix's announcement, and the group members receive the call. One of them, working on the radio, plays a conditional track heard by a man with a dog who immediately takes her for a walk. Her bark is heard by a mechanic girl who rushes to her car. Later they arrive at an underground clinic where a doctor performs complex operations to remove the tracking chips. Then, he hands over the chips extracted from law-abiding citizens previously deceased from diseases, as well as special containers that need to be kept in the mouth, so they too will be recognized as law-abiding citizens. Meanwhile, one of the resistance members, serving as a priest, meets with Rafe. The pair goes to an arms dealer and receives invisible explosive material from a girl extracted from a crashed alien ship. If attached to an organic carrier's skin or hair, scanners will not be able to detect it. Later, the resistance group gathers together. The leader distributes containers with new chips and shows a photo of the person who will go to the aliens. Lastly, he hands out poison capsules to everyone, which will help avoid being captured alive by the enemy. The group freely enters the festival and attaches the invisible alien explosive device to an official. He goes to the arriving aliens and explodes with them. The city is immediately locked down, and the police block the streets to find the attackers. The priest is the first to die, caught in gunfire. Rafe is caught by one of the aliens and tries to escape from it, hiding in a van. This is seen by the guy's comrades, who come to his rescue and destroy the alien. The surviving rebels try to escape from the city, while the aliens bring in hunter warriors from another world, and they quickly track down Rafe and his accomplices. Enraged, the legislators prepare to destroy the district where, according to their information, the resistance is based. Mulligan tries to persuade the police chief, who is heading to report to the aliens, not to allow this because he needs time to catch the suspects. But he is reminded that the decision is made and his search interests no one. Raids begin in the city, during one of which Gabe is captured, while his brother and two of his comrades reach the station and board buses 2 minutes before the expiration of the chips from law-abiding citizens. But when it seems they have managed to escape, the buses are stopped by the hunters. Realizing his capture is inevitable, one of the group takes the poison capsule. The mechanic girl attacks a hunter and is instantly vaporized. Rafe tries to run but is captured and brought to the police, where his brother is being interrogated at the same time. Mulligan shows him how Rafe is tortured to make him talk about Phoenix and give up first. Gabe learns that the city is preparing for destruction and agrees to send a message to the leader. He is brought to the surviving members of the resistance, and hearing that the guy allegedly knows ways into the zone, they agree to connect him with First. Gabe is brought to Jane Doe, who is number 1 and the leader of the resistance in the city. Upon seeing the boy, the woman calls him by name, which confuses Gabrielle, and at that moment, a police squad raids the brothel and kills Jane. The investigation reveals that Jane had installed listening devices to record conversations with police officers she served to gather secret information. Later, during a briefing with the aliens, Mulligan names the members of Phoenix who, learning about the death of First, voluntarily left this life. Before the invasion, Jane was a history teacher and changed her profession to gather secret information. Mulligan presents recordings obtained in the brothel, where it is heard that the police chief actively leaked secret information about the aliens. Captured resistance members are deported to alien mines, and Mulligan, having declared the neutralization of the Chicago threat, is appointed acting commissioner. Later, he meets with Gabe and puzzles the boy with a new thought. What if the failure of the uprising was planned? And he hands the boy a memory card, extracted from a phone once given to him by Jane. The next day, Gabe views its contents, a video dedicated to a party before his birth, where close family friends record messages for him. There, he sees both Mulligan and Jane Doe, who was acquainted with his mother, as well as some other members of Phoenix. Meanwhile, Mulligan is allowed to arrive at the Earth Control Center and meet with the legislators in their habitat. As he heads to the spaceship, the same invisible substance that was part of the explosive used in the stadium attack manifests on him, explaining that Mulligan is also part of the resistance, and the plan was organized so that he could infiltrate the main alien base and set off an explosion. During the credits, a map shows that the plan worked, and the city blockades were successfully lifted, after which many resistance foci flared up everywhere. This means that the plan to light a match and ignite a bonfire was a success, and humanity begins an active fight against the alien oppressors. Despite the film being labeled as science fiction, the message here is quite realistic. How will humanity behave when it realizes the possibility of its total occupation? Also, the filmmakers draw belief in victory from the history of humanity, using Lenin's motto, "A spark will kindle a flame." The struggle, the underground conspiracy, the film is full of revolutionary stylistics, and it watches like a real political thriller. Los Angeles, October 6th. For Mark Benford, the day begins as usual. After kissing his wife and young daughter Charlie goodbye, the FBI agent prepares for work and meets Nicole, the young nanny who looks after the girl. Olivia is also getting ready for her shift at the nearby clinic, but before leaving, she dials the number of her assistant, Bryce. However, at that moment, he arrives at the pier, intending to take his own life. At work, Mark and his partner Dmitri begin surveillance of a suspect. When the woman is joined by accomplices, the agents start a pursuit. The suspects notice the surveillance, leading to a high-speed chase. At the pier, Bryce prepares to pull the trigger, while the entire city remains unaware of what is about to happen. Mark takes a sharp turn, and something strange happens. His entire life flashes before his eyes. In this vision, the agent sees a board with clues and connections, and then he hides from bandits who have come after him. Coming to his senses, Mark realizes that he wasn't the only one who blacked out. Chaos ensues around him. Hundreds of cars have collided, and people are frantically trying to find help. The agents spot the suspect's car and head towards it. Only the woman remains alive, but she babbles something nonsensical about frightened horses. Mark leaves Dmitri by the car and rushes to his wife to check on her. As he runs through the streets, he realizes the situation is much more serious. The blackout affected the entire city and caused widespread destruction. Olivia informs her husband that hundreds of injured people are being brought to the hospital. She ends the call and attends to a patient, a boy involved in an accident. Amazingly, the teenager recognizes Olivia and calls her by name. At the bureau, the staff is urgently gathered, and Stan Wadek reports the first piece of information. People around the world lost consciousness. It is evident that millions of people died because of the blackout. But Mark is concerned about something else. He admits that he didn't just lose consciousness. During that time, it felt as though he was transported 6 months into the future, to April 29th, and he clearly saw what would happen to him on that day. His colleagues support him, and everyone shares their visions. Only Dmitri remains silent. During the blackout, he saw nothing. Mark and Dmitri organize a board to collect clues, and Benford recognizes it as the one from his vision. He mentions a name that stuck with him, D. Gibbons. According to him, this name is where the investigation should begin. Olivia hesitates, but eventually decides to tell her husband about her vision. She saw herself happy, but with another man. Mark convinces himself that it might just be an illusion, but his vision starts to come true that same evening. Charlie gives her father a bracelet that he saw on his wrist. Olivia has to take Charlie to the clinic so she won't be left alone. While she revives her daughter's favorite toy, Lloyd, the father of the injured boy. Dylan enters the room. The doctor is horrified to recognize Lloyd as the man from her vision, but he doesn't recognize her. In his memory, he didn't see his companion's face because he was always turned away. Meanwhile, the agents return to work, and unexpectedly, Dee Gibbons herself comes to the bureau. It turns out she is a religious woman who brings the agents cupcakes and doesn't understand what role she is supposed to play in the global blackout. The agents check Dee Gibbons and find out that on the day of the catastrophe, someone else with the same name used her credit card. Without delay, the agents fly to Utah, where they are met by Sheriff Keeban. During the conversation, the young woman mentions that she, like Dmitri, saw nothing during the blackout, and the guy hopes that it was just a peculiarity of some people. While the agents try to find Dee Gibbons, the bureau studies a strange video. A man who remained conscious was spotted at a baseball stadium. Mark notices an abandoned doll factory, and recalling an image from his vision, suggests checking the building. The agents immediately realize that someone is inside the factory, but they fail to remain unnoticed. An alarm goes off, and hundreds of dolls begin to sing. Mark and Dmitri find the suspect, but they don't see his face. The psychopath utters a strange phrase and throws a lit lighter. Sheriff Keeban dies from shrapnel injuries. Dmitri understands that his fear is not unfounded. He didn't see his future because that day will not come for him. Checking Dee Gibbons' phone yields results. The unknown person called an unidentified guy from the stadium. Hawk tells Dmitri about her vision. The girl saw herself pregnant in an ultrasound room. Following her colleague's advice, she decides to post her vision on the website that the FBI created to collect memories. Noah decides to follow suit. He also posts his information on the Mosaic website, stating that he saw nothing. The guy's inquiry is answered that same evening. An unknown woman calls from a hidden number and says she saw an intelligence report. According to it, the agent will die on March 15th, a maximum security prison in Germany. One of the inmates, Rudolf Geyer, strolls through the yard chatting with a guard about the blackout. That same day, Mark receives a message from the old man. He knows what caused the blackout, but will only tell Agent Benford in person. Dmitri meets Zoe, his fiancée. The girl happily tells him that in her vision she saw their wedding in Hawaii, and the agent begins to hope that he can change his fate. Mark gets permission for a trip to Munich. He meets with the old man, but Geyer promises to reveal the truth only if he is deported to the US and all charges against him are dropped. Dmitri meets the customs officer from Geyer's vision, and he confirms the old man's memories. The old prisoner gets his way. He receives a pardon, but when it comes to his testimony, it turns out that he only knows about the dead crows and that it is somehow connected to the scriptures. Benford hopes that the old man's words will be of some use. He asks Hawk to check all cases of mass bird deaths. The agents manage to find out that a similar incident was recorded in Somalia many years ago. Mark asks to be sent to Somalia, but after the failure in Germany, the agent's request is denied. Then Benford asks Al to contact a former suspect in a hacking case to help him obtain the necessary information. Meanwhile, Dmitri returns to interrogate the girl they were tailing on the day of the blackout. The guy is sure she knows what happened, but she insists that the agents are looking in the wrong place and that Dmitri should hurry, as he has little time left. Despite Olivia's request to transfer Dylan, he is kept in the ward, but she doesn't even suspect that the boy's father, Lloyd, poses a threat not only to her family. Answering a phone call, Lloyd talks to his accomplice, the one who, together with him, caused the worldwide blackout. The agents are attacked. This prompts the CIA to get involved, and all agents are sent for a polygraph test to determine why someone is now trying to eliminate them. After the interrogation, the government convenes a meeting to decide whether to continue funding the Mosaic project. Stan understands that this is the only way to gather enough information, and they must defend their case. The Senate hearings begin at 10:30 p.m., and the floor is given to Agent Benford. Mark starts to falter in his testimony because he hesitates to tell the truth. In his vision, he was drunk. While Mark struggles, his colleagues find something interesting. In satellite images, they find strange towers in Somalia. Hawk immediately informs Mark of the discovery. After a private conversation with the president, Stan finds his subordinates and tells Mark that they have secured funding. Mark calls Janice to share the good news and to warn her that they will soon return from Washington, but at that moment, the agents are attacked for the second time. In the dining car, a passenger notices an attractive fellow traveler, and to get her attention, he starts talking about the blackout. While he tries to charm the beauty, hoping to lure her to his compartment, Janice Hawk is brought to the hospital in critical condition. Learning about the attack, Olivia tries to call her husband, but soon, he personally appears at the hospital with his colleagues. The agents visit the deceased attackers. Examining the bodies, Dmitri finds a mark on one of them, a blue hand. Mark saw the exact same symbol in his memories, and it was somehow connected to the worldwide blackout. Dr. Simon Campos, the charming guy from the train, gets what he wants, and the girl ends up in his bed, but soon she begins to regret it. The stranger tells her that in his vision, he takes someone's life and enjoys it. Lloyd arranges a party for his son and brings him a Halloween costume. But as soon as the man gets distracted, Dylan leaves. The boy gets on the first bus he finds and makes his way to the right address. Dylan enters the Benford house, uninvited, calling it his home. Dmitri finds another blue hand, but this time on a road sign. Following the direction indicated, he sees another marker and continues on. The nanny calls Mark and tells him about the little guest. The man is shocked to learn that Charlie knows the boy well, even though she has never met him before. Lloyd arrives at the house and immediately recognizes it as the one from his vision. Mark also instantly understands who this man is, and when Olivia enters the room, everyone feels awkward. The agents arrive at an abandoned house, which is also marked with the blue hand. Breaking in, they find several bodies with their hands smeared in blue paint. Returning his son to the hospital, Lloyd decides to head home for some rest, but in the backseat of his car, an old acquaintance is waiting. Dr. Simon Campos, the pathologist, informs the agents that all the deceased found in the abandoned house had taken their own lives. Agent Fiona Banks arrives from London at the bureau. Her American colleagues brief her on the Blue Hand ghost community. It consists of those who did not see their future, including all the deceased discovered in the abandoned house. Dressed as ordinary guys, the agents head to the ghost club. But to enter, the guests must play Russian roulette. The agents watch in horror, but when the leader of the movement takes the stage, they reveal themselves and arrest him. During interrogation, Dimitri tries to find out who hired the Blue Hand members that attacked Hawk, but Sunderland refuses to answer any questions, fully aware of what lies ahead. In his vision, Agent Goff heard himself talking to a lawyer. Al confessed to the attorney that he was guilty of the death of a woman named Celia. Tormented by these memories, Goff leaves Dimitri a letter and heads to the roof. To change his fate and avoid being responsible for someone's death, he makes a fateful decision. In his final letter, Al gives hope to everyone who saw something terrible in their visions. He assures people that the future can be changed. Simon finds Lloyd at the hospital, and Lloyd tells his accomplice that he wants to make an official statement and reveal the truth to the world, that they were responsible for the global blackout. Meanwhile, Mark takes his wife to the coast for a romantic weekend, but their relaxation is interrupted by a phone call. Benford is informed that a criminal with star tattoos on his hand has been found, the one Mark saw in his vision. Simon proposes a poker game to his accomplice. If he wins, the secret remains a secret, and no one will know about the blackout. If Lloyd wins, the scientists will make an official statement. Simon is confident that luck will be on his side. Hawk is protecting a witness to a crime involving the criminal with the tattoo. At night, Janice requests help from Dimitri and Benford, and Mark recognizes the person from his vision. Not wanting to take any chances, Mark shoots, once again altering fate and killing the suspect. Lloyd bluffs and wins the game. He refuses the money and asks his accomplice to prepare for the announcement. Janice receives an enhanced image of the first suspect and now manages to see the ring on his hand. This could be the first significant lead. Benford tells his wife that he was able to change everything and eliminate the man with the star tattoos on his hand. But at the same time, somewhere, a new plan is being put into motion, involving another individual with the same tattoo. He delivers a suitcase with rings to an unknown old man. Experts manage to identify the alpha symbol on the ring that belonged to the original suspect. However, no one can yet determine its exact meaning. New information emerges. The NSA discovered that several months ago, a suspicious call was made to Dimitri's phone. Dimitri realizes which call is being referred to and demands that he be given the caller's information, the only way he can prevent his own death. Mark finds a message on his wife's phone about his vision. He tries to figure out which of his friends could have betrayed him, but both Aaron and Stan are outraged by Mark's suspicions and deny any involvement. The agents listen to a recording of the call Dimitri received. They managed to determine that the anonymous woman was in Hong Kong. Despite the boss's orders, Mark informs Dimitri that they are flying to Hong Kong. The agents arrive in Hong Kong, where a local colleague is already waiting for them. Stan is furious that his subordinates disobeyed his orders, but Mark risks his job to save his friend. Lloyd addresses the nation with an official statement. He admits that on the day of the catastrophe, they were conducting secret experiments and takes full responsibility. But listening to the scientist's speech, Mark suspects that the real cause may be hidden elsewhere. Stan demands that the scientist be brought to him for questioning. Hawk remembers that Lloyd's son is still in the hospital, and the boss sends her to speak with him. An unexpected event occurs. Simon Campos himself walks into Stan's office. The scientist insists that he disagrees with his colleague and believes that someone else caused the blackout. He agrees to help with the investigation if the agents grant him access to classified information. Hawk meets Lloyd at the hospital and offers him protection in exchange for information, but Lloyd refuses to cooperate and asks to be left alone. The agents try to locate the woman who called Dimitri. To do so, Mark has to break another rule. He threatens the cafe owner who attempted to withhold the necessary information. Stan shows Simon satellite images that revealed strange towers. The scientist admits that the towers are his invention, a laser designed to accelerate plasma formation. Simon can't understand how this is possible. The technology to create them is still in development. But even more surprising is this: he invented the laser in 1992, but the images were taken in 1991. The agents inform Simon about D. Gibbons, who probably created these lasers. The scientist promises to help find the person who stole his idea. Lloyd asks the chief physician to transfer Dylan to a safer clinic, but after the announcement, the scientist loses his credibility and the doctor refuses to help him. Then Olivia intervenes. She promises to do everything she can to ensure the boy's safety. Mark and Dimitri find the cafe where the woman who called is having lunch. She allows the agents to sit down, but admits that she regrets making the call, and that their visit might only make things worse. The woman claims that the shooter who will take Dimitri's life will be Benford. As proof, the stranger provides Mark's gun's serial number. Shocked by what he hears, Mark loses his temper and creates a scene. He takes the woman hostage and exits the restaurant. A local FBI agent arrives, and Mark is forced to back down. While Mark is in serious trouble in Hong Kong, Olivia is bonding with Lloyd. The scientist tells her about parallel universes in which they might have been together once. The agents are sent back to the States, and Mark is stripped of his badge. Meanwhile, Dee Gibbons visits the Sears home. Dylan is being prepared for transfer. Lloyd and Olivia bid a warm farewell, but the doctor notices something amiss. The paramedics turn out to be imposters. They open fire on the security detail and, abandoning Dylan, take Lloyd away. Lloyd regains consciousness in a basement, handcuffed. Hawk is tasked with hiding Simon in a safe place where he can continue his work, but those who need him find the agents as soon as they settle into the safe apartment. Dimitri finds Janice unconscious. Meanwhile, Simon is taken to the basement to meet an old friend. The scientists try to understand who and why they were kidnapped, but the answer comes unexpectedly. The same old man who recently received the suitcase with rings arrives in the basement. The kidnapper introduces himself as Flosso. He makes it clear that he won't be gentle, and the hostages should answer his questions precisely. Mark is assigned sessions with a psychotherapist, who helps him recall details from his memories that were previously hidden. Benford remembers that on that night he was talking to Lloyd on the phone. Later, Mark reveals another memory to Aaron. In his conversation with Lloyd, he mentioned a second blackout. Lloyd remains silent, realizing that his revelations could lead to a catastrophe, but Flosso finds a way to make the scientist talk. He has Simon's finger cut off right before Lloyd's eyes. The agents discover where the captive scientists are being held. On the way to the basement, Dimitri calls Janice and asks her to join the operation. Unable to resist any longer, Lloyd tells everything that happened during the experiment, giving Flosso's specific details. At that moment, the agents storm the location, but it turns out to be empty. The only thing awaiting the agents is a booby trap. Driving around the city, Mark recalls the map from his visions and realizes where to search for the captives. By this time, Lloyd and Simon are being prepared for execution. The agent crashes into an abandoned store and rescues the scientists. Simon is loaded into an ambulance, but inside, he is met by Flosso. The old man apologizes for the finger and explains that it was to divert suspicion from the boy and to ensure Simon has no desire to rebel. He reminds him that Simon was the initial suspect. Several months earlier, after his father's funeral, unknown individuals took the scientist to a baseball game and ordered him to wear the ring. Thanks to it, he remained conscious while everyone else blacked out. The operation was led by Dee Gibbons. Janice informs Simon that he will be held in custody for some time. The young man stages a spectacle and manages to escape, but not for long. When he arrives in Canada, Hawk is already waiting for him with armed soldiers. Hawk agrees to stay in Canada so that Simon can visit his family. But once again, Simon outsmarts the agent and escapes, despite wearing a special bracelet. Simon heads to a boat owned by an old friend, confident that no one will find him there. However, Hawk beats him to the boat, arriving even before he does. The pair returns to Simon's house, pretending that nothing has happened. The family prepares for dinner, and their Uncle Teddy arrives. Simon opens the door for his relative and is greeted by Flosso. During dinner, a call comes in, and Simon's mother says it's Annabelle, his sister, who left home after the blackout. Flosso prevents Simon from answering the phone and shows him a video. His sister is being held hostage to ensure that Simon doesn't try to escape again. To further demonstrate the seriousness of his intentions, Flosso shows Simon a body in his trunk, the old man from the boat. Fed up with the blackmail, Simon decides to break free. He attacks Flosso and stops his heart. Mark brings Lloyd to his house and asks him to recall everything from his vision. Both men feel uneasy, but the agent knows that this is crucial for his investigation. Dimitri is confident that the Hong Kong woman's prophecy won't come true because he turned in Mark's gun for destruction, but attempts to change the future fail. The gun goes missing. The agents fly to Somalia to inspect the strange structures in person. Simon is part of the expedition, but he is denied a weapon. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Mark informs his boss that he has discovered Dee Gibbons' real name, Dyson Frost, and that somehow he will be connected to Charlie. The team of agents comes under fire. Their guide tries to explain that they are on a humanitarian mission, but this doesn't stop the Somalis who kill the translator. The Somali leader realizes that he's being lied to. He has already seen foreigners arrive and set up the towers many years ago. He locks the visitors up and promises to kill them, one by one. The agents manage to disable the guards and take their weapons. They reach the helicopter, but it's already being looted by locals, forcing the agents to come up with a new plan. The team attacks their opponents but doesn't have time to escape. They are once again confronted by the leader. This time, everyone understands that there will be no chance to fight back. One of the guards, out of fear, reveals the truth about the visitors. Learning that they are FBI agents, the Somali demands a large ransom to help him take over the country. Janice manages to persuade the leader. She convinces him that their mission is not to start a war, but to prevent one. The Somali helps the group reach one of the towers. Simon examines the structure with surprise, noting that it was built exactly according to his design, but long before he developed it. Dimitri discovers a videotape that has been stored in the tower for 18 years. On the tape, the Somali recognizes his fellow tribesman, whom he believed died during the first blackout. The agents also identify the experiment's author. It was D. Gibbons. Exploring the tower's tunnels, the agents find a sealed room where villagers were imprisoned. Judging by the remains, the experiment's participants were killed. The Somali leader is enraged by what he sees and plans to take revenge on the Americans, but Vogel acts faster, leaving the Somali leader lying with his tribesmen. Dimitri reviews the tape again, and the next few seconds shock him. D. Gibbons from 1991 addresses him by name. The recording is sent to the department. Mark watches the message left by Gibbons many years ago. Following the criminal's clues, Benford deciphers the chess code and dials the phone number that Gibbons left specifically for the agents. Mark arrives at a chess club to meet someone who could help in the search for the scientist, but the only witness has been killed. Benford realizes that there is someone in the department leaking information. To find out who the traitor is, Agent Vogel gathers everyone in the conference room, and a special team searches the employees' offices. A bug is found on Mark's desk. Everyone with access to the office falls under suspicion, creating tension among the colleagues. The agents are most suspicious of Janice. Recently, she has taken many days off, which she struggles to explain, but she deflects suspicion by accusing Marcy, a colleague with family problems. Dimitri reviews the camera footage and notices a pattern. Marcy was signaling with a coffee cup. Mark looks up at the girl and she understands everything. A shootout ensues in the office. Marcy kills her colleagues and runs outside. Her accomplice arrives on a motorcycle to help her escape, but Janice manages to prevent the getaway. Benford receives a call from Dyson Frost. He offers the agent a personal meeting and promises to call back. Janice and Simon head to the underground parking garage where the girl suddenly stops. She tells the scientist that his signal has been received. Her boss is ready to talk to him. Simon realizes that Marcy was just a distraction. The real traitor has always been Hawk. The police inform the feds that a crime was committed the previous night using the stolen gun. Dimitri catches up with Marcy to find out to whom she passed the gun, but she only says that preventing Dimitri's death is impossible. The agents receive a signal that a criminal with Mark's gun is committing a crime in the city center. Dimitri steps forward, trying to distract the guy and persuade him to release the hostage. As soon as the assailant lowers his guard, Dimitri shoots. Despite the successful outcome, there is no relief. The gun in the attacker's possession has a different serial number. Agent Dimitri prepares for his wedding, trying not to think about the future. But while the bride and guests wait for him at the church, D. Gibbons attacks him at his home. Mark decides to inform his wife about his missing friend, and while she is on the phone, D. Gibbons sits down next to Charlie. The agents carefully interrogate Charlie, and the girl describes her conversation with the stranger. She also hands over a picture the old man left her. Mark and his colleagues prepare to visit the address that D. Gibbons provided with the picture. Meanwhile, Dimitri finds himself at the mercy of a gun, which the villain has attached to a special device. The mad scientist enthusiastically tells his hostage about his inventions and plans. He claims that Dimitri's death is his only chance to save his own life. Benford arrives at the designated location. Finally, a teenager approaches the agent and hands him a backpack with a phone. The agent follows all of the criminal's instructions without question to save his friend. He leaves his colleagues behind and, getting into the prepared car, successfully evades pursuit. D. Gibbons directs Mark along a highway through the countryside. Constantly checking his watch, the agent continues his journey through the mountains. Finally, he spots D. Gibbons. The old man raises his gun and orders the agent to handcuff himself. Mark distracts the old man and attacks him. He demands that Gibbons take him to Dimitri, but someone no longer wishes to keep the witness alive. The scientist is eliminated. As he dies, he doesn't have time to tell Mark where Dimitri is. The navigator leads Mark to the last known location of D. Gibbons. Benford bursts into the building and spots his friend. There are less than 2 minutes left before the automatic shot, and Mark tries to solve the scientist puzzle to stop the mechanism. The timer reaches 0 and the gun fires, but by this time, Mark manages to lift the gun and Dimitri survives. As soon as Dimitri gets out of the chair, water washes away the scientist's map, destroying all the evidence and clues. Mark instructs his colleagues to figure out Frost's blueprints and determine how they are connected to the second blackout which the mad scientist mentioned. A strange man appears at Olivia's house. He babbles incoherently, claiming that the doctor's husband is Lloyd. Meanwhile, Janice delivers Frost's blueprints to a professor of archaeology, but the people for whom the double agent secretly works demand that she steal the originals and hand them over. Hawk is forced to take a risk. She steals the blueprints from the Institute and sneaks into the office to retrieve the last copy from Mark's desk. Benford catches his colleague red-handed, but she manages to talk her way out by inventing a story about lost documents. Mark asks Hawk to come to the office to meet with the professor. The girl realizes that her deception has been uncovered, but Benford postpones the conversation and returns to his discussion with the scientist. According to the old man, the blueprints that D. Gibbons had were some kind of device for counting down dates. One of them is October 6th, the day of the blackout. Frost's words keep replaying in Mark's mind, and an idea strikes him. He breaks open the large chess piece hanging on the board. Inside, the agent finds a ring with an unknown symbol. Olivia meets Gabriel, the strange man, again. He keeps repeating random nonsensical words, but finally, the woman manages to discern the main point. The guy has been subjected to multiple blackouts, becoming a victim of Frost's experiments. Experts provide the scientists with the results of analyzing Frost's ring, and Simon makes an astonishing discovery. Inside the ring is a device that allowed its wearer to remain conscious during the blackout. Janice meets with her handlers. After failing the mission with the blueprints, she is given one last chance. This time, she must retrieve the ring from the vault and eliminate Benford. On a city bridge, Simon spots his sister. Annabelle delivers a message to her brother. They need him and the ring. Simon has only 12 hours, or else his sister will be killed. Dimitri arrives at a crime scene and learns that someone has been eliminating all those who managed to survive the predicted date of their death in the last 2 weeks. Simon memorizes the safe's code when Lloyd places the ring inside. As soon as the scientist is left alone, he decides to use this opportunity to save his sister. The agents identify the executioner who has been getting rid of all the survivors. It turns out to be Mr. Slingerland. The agents catch the psycho just as he tries to dispose of another victim, but despite all efforts to save her, an agent accidentally hits the girl. Mark discovers a minivan and Annabelle inside. He informs Simon, but it's already too late. The scientist escapes with the ring. The agents investigate Simon and his alibi for the day of the blackout. Using special software, they establish that he was indeed the prime suspect at the baseball stadium. Olivia brings Gabriel to Mark's office to help find clues. According to the madman, Benford's wall is full of errors, and he forces the agent to redo everything according to his notebook. During interrogation, Gabriel says that Frost wasn't the only leader. There was someone much more important, and he will repeat the blackout very soon. The deranged stranger shows a portrait of this person. It turns out to be the man Simon is currently talking to. Gabriel is set to be transferred to a safe house, and Janice informs her handlers about it. The minivan falls into an ambush, but instead of the strange madman, it's Mark disguised inside. But the agent's operation doesn't end there. He manages to infiltrate the villain's lair and capture the leader. Mark realizes who the traitor in their department is, but Janice still doesn't tell the truth. She claims she was only working for the CIA. Benford begins interrogating the main suspect. He wants to know how the villain caused the global blackout, but the scientist is confident that it doesn't matter. Regardless of how the day unfolds, the outcome will be the same. Benford will be dead by nightfall. Dimitri heads to Janice's house and finds Simon there. Hawk sees no other way out. She helps her partner arrest Simon, despite their previous arrangement. Despite warnings, Mark loses control and uses force to find out when the global blackout is planned. Stan realizes that Benford is not in control of himself and orders him to be removed from the office. At 6 in the evening, thousands of people gather in the streets to celebrate April the 29th, the day from the visions. Lloyd arrives at Olivia's house to ensure events unfold correctly, but the woman also decides to change her fate and leaves town with Charlie. Mark's chain of events also changes. He starts a brawl in a bar and ends up in a jail cell. With just over an hour left until the moment of truth, all the characters find themselves in different places, but Stan posts bail for Mark, and everything starts to fall into place. The agents return to the bureau due to a report of planted explosives. At the same time, Lloyd finds Olivia and asks her to return home so they can recreate the evening from their shared memories. The scientist's plan begins to unfold. Dylan writes the formula he saw Lloyd use on the mirror. The FBI building is attacked by masked assailants, but this doesn't stop Mark, and he finds himself in his place at the map with the clues. Simon infiltrates the corporation's server room to hack the computer and prevent another blackout. At the appointed time, Lloyd calls Mark and gives the date of the next blackout, the next 48 hours. Thanks to Gabriel's notebook, Benford learns the exact time. The blackout will happen in 12 minutes. The masked criminals destroy Mark's office and all his work, but the agent survives and tries to fight back. Simon notices that someone has remotely taken control of the program and he cannot stop it. Dimitri suspects the scientist did it on purpose, but Simon swears he is trying to prevent the catastrophe. Mark manages to warn his boss about the next blackout, but he can't get out of the building and is once again surrounded by armed mercenaries. With 30 seconds left before the explosion, Mark runs for the exit, but at that moment the mechanism activates, and the world freezes again, glimpsing into its future. This is where the series ends. And the man opens his eyes in the middle of a lake with a red drone flying overhead. Visions of his family, spaceships, and shootouts flash before him. Finally gathering himself, the man swims towards the shore, accompanied by the drone, which he calls Ezra, to check his mental health. Suddenly cries for help echo from the lake, and another man, followed by a woman, appears. None of them remembers what happened to them. Fina recognizes the wreckage on the shore as the remnants of a warship called Karik, and Ezra recalls an invasion. Then the men discover the remnants of a car that must have been there for centuries. Apparently there used to be a road in this place. People remember the invasion, and it turns out they all died in different years. Moreover, Abram confesses that he is 67 years old, although he looks 25. According to the red drone, they were brought back to life in their prime years. Their memories are different because they died at different times. Around them is Earth, but 400 years after the extinction of humanity, destroyed by aliens. They were resurrected by creatures living in the water, called sparks. The ultimate goal is the revival of humanity, and the rest of the information can be found in the settlement where the others who have returned live. The drone orders Ezra to collect the sparks. Gathering their meager belongings, the people set off after the drone, trying to understand why the Kariks revived them. Soon they find partially destroyed arches, and Abram rushes to them, rejoicing in his young, strong body. On one of the structures, he sees unknown hieroglyphics and touches them. The man is thrown back, and he admits that he saw everything. Suddenly the red drone is shot down, and a second shot wounds Abram. The trio runs behind a hill where Ezra, setting up an ambush, captures the pursuer. The man, named Jax, denies the existence of the settlement. The glowing substance on his neck is a skin rider, which is one with the human body. He needs the sparks, but Fina confidently demonstrates her proficiency with a weapon. Abram insists that when he touched the unknown symbols on the arch, he felt the vastness of outer space. But this elicits mockery from Jax, who suddenly frees himself and lunges at Ezra. However, Fina points his own weapon at him. This time they tie the man securely and leave, despite his claim to know Ezra's brother. Soon the team takes shelter in a cave, while others with glowing parasites on their necks are found, including Ezra's brother Silas. Meanwhile, the resurrected people in the cave discuss ways to recreate a human being and wonder where the aliens obtained the initial material. During the night, Abram's wound becomes inflamed. He is lowered into a small pond where the sparks are released. By morning, Abram emerges completely healthy. Fina discusses what happened to Ezra, as she doesn't understand why they chose her out of millions of great people. Soon the resurrected individuals see high walls of a settlement in the distance, but on their way, skin riders with glowing necks catch up to them. Ezra stays behind to delay the pursuit. He manages to do so for a while until he recognizes his brother Silas among them. In the meantime, Fina and Abram reach the settlement's walls, and just when it seems they are destined to be captured, the gates open. A yellow drone neutralizes the skin riders and lets the fugitives inside. It then flies after Ezra, carrying him through the air into the settlement where there's no one around. In response to all their questions, the drone invites them to follow and shows them rows of graves where the settlers rest. Later, the yellow drone opens the doors of an abandoned military base for the people where the previous settlers lived. In the forest, skin riders capture a man who escaped from them. Silas discovers that the glowing creature they call companions has inexplicably stopped functioning in Duncan's neck and promises to fix it. The resurrected individuals learn that the settlers died from a new virus that still spreads throughout the region. The yellow drone asks them to release the sparks into a vessel with water and learns from them that the sparks can create a vaccine if people bring the ingredients found in the living lake. Fina begins to bleed from her nose, and she stays at the base while the men go to the lake. She takes on the task of repairing the damaged red drone. On their way, Ezra tries to understand how the system that brought them back to life works. The drone operates on sparks, but who controls the sparks is unknown. The men reach the lake and release the sparks into the water to collect the necessary ingredients. In the settlement, Ezra's wife Lynn suddenly appears before Fina. She explains that she worked as a nurse during the invasion and can offer help, but then disappears just as suddenly. On the lake's shore, Ezra confesses that one of the skin riders is his brother, meaning these people are also resurrected. He recalls the moment when he first saw the alien spaceship flying overhead and signaled to his brother that he was a worthless, spoiled child. Now he is determined to apologize and try to retrieve Silas. Meanwhile, a hologram of Lynn appears again to Fina, helping her repair the red drone. In the meantime, the yellow drone warns of the approaching skin riders. Ezra asks Abram to run while he himself tries to intercept his brother Silas. However, he gets surrounded and subdued. Regaining consciousness, he finds himself alone with his brother, who admits that he prohibited forcibly transforming him into a skin rider because he wants his brother to join them voluntarily. Each skin rider has a companion on their neck, which teaches the person how to behave correctly and telepathically connects them with others. Thanks to the companion, Silas is now the leader and mentor for the others, whereas in the previous world, he was nobody. Then Silas suddenly falls asleep, signaling Ezra to leave. Ezra meets Abram in the forest, to whom he explains his intention to save his brother. The men return to the lake, where the sparks have created 3 vaccine capsules for them. After consuming their doses, they bring the third one to Fina, whose condition worsens. Lynn asks the red drone to replace her image with someone dear to the girl, and Duncan appears next to Fina. Fina regains consciousness after her friends administer the vaccine. The next day, Abram finds a room that is blocked, revealing a glowing obelisk. Meanwhile, in the forest, Silas argues with Duncan about the purpose of the companion controlling the thoughts of the skin riders in the community because Silas believes it amounts to slavery. In the settlement, Abram learns to read hieroglyphs and understands that the unknown hosts offered to dig up weapons against the skin riders in the forest in exchange for more people for the settlement. Ezra goes to the forest for the excavation. Meanwhile, Silas brings Duncan to an open area where Jax conducts training fights, taunting regular people. Unexpectedly, Duncan defeats Jax. Silas stops the duel and explains that he tested his theory, revealing that humans react faster by a fraction of a second than skin riders. Currently, Duncan has a weak companion, so he makes decisions with just one brain, the human one. In contrast, skin riders with healthy companions have a signal that passes through 2 brains, the humans and the companions, causing a slight delay. The conclusion is that humans will always outperform them in combat. To gain an advantage over humans, Silas plans to perform brain surgery to reduce the signal delay. However, a working drone and a test subject are required for this. In the meantime, the yellow drone brings Ezra to the excavation site, which the skin riders immediately learn about. Ezra unearths an item that the yellow drone calls a weapon. In the settlement, Abram, upon touching the obelisk, suddenly realizes that he understands the meaning of the hieroglyphs on it. However, he doesn't yet grasp what this knowledge entails. In the forest, the yellow drone warns Ezra about the approaching skin riders. They attempt to flee, but the skin riders surround them and take the unearthed weapon. Unexpectedly, the weapon activates and kills one of the skin riders. Taking advantage of the chaos, Ezra scatters the rest and escapes. Meanwhile, Fina tries to find out from the red drone why the unknown beings are resurrecting humanity. She requests the revival of Duncan, unaware that he has already been resurrected and has become a skin rider. Ezra brings the weapon meant to eliminate skin riders to the obelisk, hoping it will help establish contact. However, he refuses to kill the innocent inhabitants until the obelisk explains who they are and what is happening. The drones controlled by the obelisk promise to resurrect Ezra's family if he obeys them in all matters. Ezra has no choice but to comply. Later that night, Fina goes to the obelisk, where she finds Ezra, who, like her, hopes for the return of loved ones. They notice that the weapon unearthed in the forest has opened. The obelisk issues new symbols, instructing Fina to go to the lake to receive new people. However, skin riders spot her on the way. As for Abram, the drone tells him about the structure of the glowing companion on the necks of the skin riders, which is tightly connected to the human brain through a crystalline structure. The weapon found in the forest destroys these crystals, eliminating the parasite. When a skin rider dies, its memory is preserved on the crystal, which is passed down to its ancestor. This is what needs to be found and destroyed. Fina sees Lynn emerging from the lake and helps her get ashore. When Jax appears on the shore, the red drone neutralizes him. The girls attempt to escape but are captured by Duncan, who seizes the red drone and fails to recognize Fina, his beloved from the past. The girls try to flee, but Lynn injures her leg and orders Fina to go to the settlement and fetch her husband. Lynn, on the other hand, falls into the hands of the skin riders, who return her to the lake. There, Jax shows how the sparks work, healing her injured leg. But suddenly a stone hits Jax's head, and an unknown little wild girl takes Lynn to her forest dwelling, providing her with shoes and food. However, it turns out the girl cannot speak. During this time, Fina reaches the base and informs Ezra about the resurrection of his wife, Lynn. Despite the yellow drone's warning that when skin riders take someone, it's forever, Ezra is determined to rescue her. Jax finds the little wild girl's home, but she has already taken Lynn away. They hide in the forest. At the same time, Ezra contemplates how to disable the force field since the obelisk prevents him from doing so, leaving him unable to leave the gates. Fina admits that she saw Duncan, who is also with the skin riders now, and he didn't recognize her. She fears the same will happen to Lynn. Meanwhile, in the forest, Jax tracks the runaways and explains that even the sparks make mistakes, resulting in flawed individuals. He is ready to destroy the little girl, but Lynn persuades him not to do it. At the same time, Silas extracts the crystal companion from the deceased skin rider's neck and instructs one of the women to take it to the ancestor. Then, they bring Lynn to him. As for Abram, while communicating with the obelisk, he suddenly surmises that he had lived in this settlement before, which is confirmed by a notebook he found with his own handwriting. Later, Fina speculates that they all have lived here before. The yellow drone confirms this fact and leads Abram to a graveyard where he shows everyone who is buried there, including Ezra's grave. It turns out that he had also been resurrected and lived in the settlement at one point. Then the yellow drone guides Abram to the next grave where he finds himself and encourages him to start a new life honorably. Fina demands that the man bind himself. He agrees but suddenly snatches a weapon from Fina and stuns the skin rider standing behind her. At the same time in the bunker, Abram is trying to find out from Yellow where the progenitor is located. However, she does not know, but Jax knows, and he heads to the bottomless lake, dives into it, and emerges in a cave. Meanwhile, Silas is trying to convince Ezra that life in his community is much better than in the bunker. Fina begins to trust Duncan and agrees with his plan. And in the camp, Lynn's escape is discovered. Duncan immediately receives a message about this from other skin riders and agrees with Fina's plan to send them on a false trail to enter the camp and save Ezra. The pursuit heads in another direction. Silas demonstrates to his brother the capabilities that a companion gives to the human body. He dips his hand into a vessel with sparks and explains that they cannot kill a companion as it goes against their principles. So if Ezra wants to kill the companion, he will have to kill the person. Fina and Duncan infiltrate the camp and seize the skin rider's weapons, and Jax reaches the ancestors' dwelling place. He asks them to explain how the drone works, and several human figures come out to him. Fina and Duncan find Lynn. The girl explains that after being infected by the parasite, she immediately plunged her hand into the sparks and it seems to have helped. Duncan asks the women to leave while he finds Ezra. The ancestors show Jax how the drone works. And in the bunker, Yellow confesses to Abram that not a human lies in one of the graves. Silas proves to Ezra that the obelisk is no better than a companion, as it also subjugates people. He lets slip that all of them, including his brother's wife and daughter, once lived in the settlement. Their conversation is interrupted by Duncan, who, under threat of arms, takes Ezra and leads the group to the settlement by a shortcut. But the protective barrier detecting a companion in Duncan does not let him pass, unlike Lynn. Then Fina ties his hands. But at that moment, the pursuit led by Silas bursts onto the clearing. Duncan pushes Fina behind the barrier, and they with Ezra prepare to fight. Abram runs to the obelisk, and it lets the men through on the condition that Duncan remains in the yard until they figure out how to free him from the parasite. At the same time, the ancestors express concern about Jax's hatred for humans, as they are much better carriers than Kariks, and they advise him to find a compromise. Meanwhile, Duncan confesses that his companion is still weak, but he is gaining strength. He remembers the settlers and confirms that Kylie is alive. Sparks rejuvenate people in the prime of life, but children at the age of their actual death. He also lost a wife and a child, and it was Fina, although the woman does not remember this. Abram explains that they are another generation of the revived. The first one lies in the graves, and they are them too. Jax reprograms the red drone, refusing everything human that was in its memory. Fina unties her husband, but when she falls asleep, Duncan's companion receives a signal from Silas and he heads to the bunker. There, Abram confesses to Ezra that the drone showed him the memory of another woman he saw a year before the invasion. It feels like someone knew about the invasion and offered people help. He wants to consult with Yellow, but she is nowhere to be found. This happens because Duncan is just locking the drone behind one of the panels. Then he attacks Abram, knocks him out, and heads to the obelisk, despite his human side resisting it. He screams in frustration and Ezra hears him. He runs to him, but Duncan closes the doors and enters symbols that deactivate the force field. Realizing this, Ezra rushes to Fina and they manage to barricade the bunker doors. Duncan's companion comes out in the open and confesses that all this was done for the sake of the weapon he hid. He is ready to reveal where Kylie is now if they hand over the bunker to the Skin Riders. The man is tied up. Outside, the sounds of banging are heard, Skin Riders trying to break down the door. Through Duncan, Silas offers to hand over the bunker. Then he will say where Ezra's daughter is now, because someone from the first settlement managed to avoid death from disease. A debate ensues, resulting in a decision to deactivate the parasite using Lynn's medical knowledge. Jax returns. He expresses his dissatisfaction to Silas, as he could have infected Ezra long ago, but lets him go. Silas cuts off the conversation and orders to continue working on the drone. At this time in the bunker, Lynn tries to figure out how the companion works, and it confesses that it can cause great pain to its master. Ezra and Abram conclude that the settlement existed for at least 10 years, and there must be survivors, otherwise, who buried the fallen. Moreover, Yellow said that a drone is buried in one of the graves. At that moment, the knocking at the door resumes. Ezra remembers that there is electricity in the bunker. Fina digests the cable, and a strong electric shock destroys one of the Skin Riders. At the same time, Abram finds Yellow. Simultaneously, people realize that Duncan is acting as a transmitter, and they move him to another room. As they part, Ezra asks to tell his brother that he loves and believes in him. This message puzzles Silas. Yellow scans Duncan and discovers that the parasite has affected all human organs, and even the sparks cannot save him. Abram tries to get answers from the obelisk. Moreover, Yellow said that Duncan was given access codes, but by whom? The man again remembers that woman in the hospital. She had a drone, sparks, and symbols of knowledge on her bracelet, so something was known before the invasion. At Ezra's request, Yellow shows the image of the woman, and he recognizes his mother Eleanor. Meanwhile, Silas prepares to continue breaking down the doors, but something leads him to the cemetery. Jax, following him, reminds him that he is not human and he should not care about the graves, so he intends to start silencing personalities from him. Silas is arrested. At this time in the bunker, Yellow confesses that Eleanor was one of the initiators of the revival of the human race. Duncan is not lying. Kylie was in the settlement, and only he can say where the survivors are now. Duncan's companion is knocked out with a tranquilizer, and the man is tied to a table. While the parasite sleeps, the man comes to and points on the map the direction the survivors went. He advises finding the wild girl and wakes up. After which, Yellow finds the weapon he had hidden earlier. The people notice the silence outside and, opening the doors, kill the sentinels left by the Skin Riders. Making sure that there is no one else in the yard, Ezra and Lynn say goodbye to their friends and set out to find Kylie. Jax activates the drone, intending to remove the human personality from Silas, and learns about the presence of Ezra and Lynn in the forest. He sends the Skin Riders to follow the pair. Fina comes to Duncan and admits that she is ready to kill him to free her loved one. However, Yellow knocks him out. The man regains consciousness in the cemetery and is relieved, thinking that Fina could not bring herself to harm him. In fact, Yellow has injected a beacon into his body, and now people can track his path. At this time, Ezra and Lynn find the wild girl and ask her to guide them to Kylie. Silas regains consciousness when the red drone informs him that he did the opposite, preserved his personality, and suppressed the parasite's capabilities. At the same time, Ezra and Lynn notice they are being followed and try to evade the Skin Riders. However, arrows fly from the rocks, the skin riders perish, and the survivors approach the people. Meanwhile, in the camp, Jax leaves Duncan on guard while he and his people follow Ezra and Lynn. They are then scanned for safety, and upon confirmation, the settlement leader Rowan leads them into the camp. She warns them that they do not truly know their daughter. They only remember her up to the age of 6, and they are merely copies of those who lived in the settlement. Abram and Fina dig up a broken drone from the grave, hoping to retrieve data from its memory. Rowan brings Ezra and Lynn to the hidden camp in the mountain caves. Noticing the strange expressions on people's faces, she explains that they both died defending the previous camp from an attack. If it weren't for Lynn, no one would have survived. Silas killed the woman. Fina connects Yellow to the memory of the broken drone, and she promises to show the events of the past. At the camp, Ezra and Lynn's adult daughter arrives. Although she understands what they feel, she refuses to recognize them as her parents. Red notices that Silas is experiencing severe pain. He flies to Duncan, and at that moment in the camp, a bloody Justin appears, who orders him to take the rest of the people and rush to the place where they were ambushed. He carries out the order, and Jax disappears because it was a hologram created by Red. Silas escapes. The real Jax finds the ambush site and orders a search of the rocks. In the bunker, Yellow transports Fina and Abram into a virtual reality of the past settlement where people go about their daily activities. Jax enters the gates and explains that Silas developed a growth on his neck, after which he attacked his friends. All this happened near the old Karrik ship. Returning to their reality, the people realize that this was the first case of companion infection. Yellow explains that the parasites create a structure similar to fungal spores. Silas likely inhaled them. The parasites themselves were brought by the Karriks, who were their carriers before humans. Meanwhile, a boy from the survivors, Thomas, carelessly falls into the hands of Justin. Silas begins to experience severe pain. Red tries to alleviate his condition and notices Duncan rushing towards the bunker. Apparently, he has discovered his escape and wants to detain Silas. Red leads him another way. At the same time, Thomas learns that he has been infected with the parasite. At the camp, his absence is noticed. Rowan calls a council and Ezra advises them to flee. If Thomas reveals the camp, they will not survive. Yellow shows how Abram proposed to create a virus capable of killing the parasite, although the idea itself belongs to the obelisk. People heatedly discuss this proposal, and many disagree. Lynn suggests splitting up. Those who take the virus should stay in the bunker, as they will be weakened. Rowan speaks against it. Abram realizes that he was the cause of the remaining deaths. In the caves, Ezra urges everyone to leave while he defends them. At this time, Silas reaches the bunker and sees Duncan sitting by a campfire. He lures him into the workshop and locks him in there. Abram is overwhelmed with guilt, runs to the obelisk, and voices his accusations. Suddenly, it creates the image of a second Abram, who says that on the other side of the obelisk are creators who sincerely believed they were saving the settlement. The virus just turned out to be slower than the parasite cells. The second Abram disappears as voices of Ezra and Lynn come from behind the doors. Fina opens the doors, and friends push Silas inside. They immediately disappear as they were holograms created by Red. Silas asks to be heard. The drone supports this request and reports that they cannot destroy the ancestor without Silas. At this point, the boy loses consciousness, and they bring him inside. Ezra, Lynn, and the young archers set up an ambush, but Thomas appears, shoots at them, and wounds Kylie's fiancé, Nico. Ezra kills the boy, and upon examining, finds a parasite. Lifting his arrow, he realizes there is something on its tip. At that moment, Jax appears with his people and calls them to battle. Red puts Silas into a coma. Meanwhile, Lynn and Kylie bring the injured Nico inside. Justin orders his man to watch the backup entrance to the cave. Lynn starts treating Nico, but the worst part is that the arrow tip might have a parasite larva. The boy then demands to be killed, as Lynn herself set such rules. Duncan tries to call any of the skin riders for help, and Yellow explains to Fina and Abram that the parasite is killing Silas so that he cannot reveal the way to the progenitor. Then Red admits that he can link the minds of Abram and Silas, which might help reveal the secret. At this time, Kylie decides to help her father patrol. The girl recalls the past and calls Jax his best friend, which greatly surprises Ezra. And his urge to kill arises because the parasites are very afraid that the human inside might take over if he remembers his attachments. Father and daughter return to the cave, and Ezra proposes that his wife, daughter, and Nico take another road while he guards them. After heated arguments, they head to the second exit. Abram enters Silas's mind and finds himself in a church. It turns out that the boy's mind considers the church a sanctuary. Abram admits that Silas will no longer come to himself, and he himself describes the way to the lake of the progenitor. The parasites are interconnected precisely through it. It is the source of their energy, strength, and knowledge. Silas knows for sure humanity will not survive if the lake does not disappear. Ezra resorts to trickery, and Kylie kills a lurking skin rider. The father bids farewell to everyone and stays in the cave. At the same time, Abram and Fina develop a plan to destroy the progenitor. Yellow explains that the weapon consists of 3 parts. 2 of these are standalone weapons, capable of operating independently of each other. However, the top part is dangerous for humans themselves, so it is discarded. Only the lower part remains, which destroys the progenitor. But this part will not work without the middle, where a human personality must be placed. But the progenitor has studied all the skin riders in this world, so the chances of getting into it are slim. And then Abram realizes why Silas was needed. Later, Fina reflects on her promise to Duncan to kill him and free him from the parasite. Then, Yellow admits that her husband is in the workshop in the yard. The woman arms herself and heads to the yard, but just as she is ready to open the door to the workshop, a skin rider enters the yard and releases Duncan. Fina tries to stop the men, but Duncan reminds her that she cannot kill him and leaves. At this time, Abram comes to Silas again and explains that they need his help. Jax decides to attack, realizing that Ezra is the only defender of the camp. He orders his men to engage him while he himself follows the trail of Lynn, Kylie, and Nico. Nico is losing strength, and Lynn decides to make a stretcher, although the boy asks to just leave him. And Ezra sets up an ambush, and one by one eliminates the skin riders, then follows the trail of his wife. Nico transforms and grabs Lynn by the throat. He is ready to kill the woman, but Kylie interferes. The boy's companion admits that the girl is very dear to him, but he cannot indulge the carrier's weaknesses, and when Nico raises his sword, Kylie shoots him. Ezra catches up with them, not knowing that Jax is monitoring their reunion, but he receives a message about Silas's betrayal, and Jax leaves. Silas asks Abram to wait for his death, take his crystal, and insert it into the weapon. Then he will be in the middle part and can help. Abram does not fully understand how it works, but thanks Silas. They say goodbye. Abram comes to his senses when Silas dies, and Jax catches up with Duncan and his men by the lake. After a dispute, he orders everyone to stay in ambush, and he and Duncan will dive to the progenitor. Meanwhile, Lynn and Ezra bury Nico and console their daughter. Simultaneously, Fina and Abram bury Silas. Later, the groups meet, unaware that a black drone is watching them, which takes off above the earth and heads for a spacecraft. Abram tells Ezra everything that happened with his brother and the plan to destroy the progenitor, but he does not want to endanger his family. Yellow vaccinates Kylie, explaining that the vaccine was made by Sparks. The girl tells Fina that Duncan became a skin rider after her death, and no one knows how it happened. At the same time, Abram admits that he no longer believes in the obelisk, but he believes in Silas and is ready to do everything to destroy the progenitor. He tells Ezra about the weapon's operation. A part of Silas will guide them inside, but what to do next, he doesn't know. Ezra laughs at such a plan, and his daughter hears this. Abram and Fina try to convince Ezra that this is why they were resurrected. Otherwise, humanity is doomed. But they cannot persuade him. Then Abram and Fina leave together. Ezra is tormented by guilt, although Lynn tries to remind him of his duty to his family. At this time, Kylie is reviewing the map to the progenitor's lake and secretly leaves the bunker. Red informs the parents that he cannot find the girl, and they, realizing where she has gone, rush after her. Meanwhile, Kylie catches up with Fina and Abram, and later Ezra and Lynn appear. Thus they all come together again, but at the lake itself, they fall into an ambush by the skin riders. A battle ensues in which the group of survivors wins, but Abram is seriously wounded. However, Kylie has Sparks with her, and she suggests releasing them into the lake. As they start doing this, Duncan emerges from the water and shoots Lynn and Kylie. Fina, under the cover of a shield, rushes to him, and they both disappear under the water. Ezra releases the Sparks and brings the wounded into the water. Then a wounded Fina emerges, saying she couldn't overcome Duncan. Ezra dives and finds a wounded Duncan, who has reverted to his true self before death. He apologizes and loses consciousness, and Ezra sees in front of him a glowing something with crystals and fits the lower part of the weapon onto one of them. Then he inserts Silas's little crystal into the middle part of the weapon and looks for the place where it needs to be placed. But then Jax appears. He has always hated his carrier and all humans, and he will not let the progenitor be destroyed. The men engage in combat, and just as Jax is about to win, the revived Duncan attacks him. Ezra finds the right crystal and fits the middle part of the weapon onto it, and suddenly finds himself in a room where he is met by Silas. The brother explains that they are inside the progenitor, and only he could create this home in this place. He is a Trojan horse from which destruction will enter the progenitor. Ezra picks up the box with the symbol of knowledge from his mother and realizes that it is a detonator. The brother says goodbye to him, and when Jax appears, they activate the bomb. Ezra finds himself in the cave where the progenitor is destroyed, to Jax's great sorrow. The man emerges and finds his loved ones healed. Their elation is washed by a black drone, which again heads to the spaceship, where it is met by Eleanor and Duncan. They realize that the deed is done and humanity has a chance. Despite some illogicality, the story is quite extraordinary. It's not about battles with aliens, as the Kuriks are only briefly shown once in a flashback, and not about humans' attempts to cunningly escape the dictate of their rule. At the heart is the question of the value of a person, the preservation of which can lead to peace and the rebuilding of civilization. It all begins in a desert, where a lone child stumbles along, gnawing on a human finger, searching for his mother. A few miles away, a car drives down a road that abruptly ends in the middle of the desert. The man driving the car steps out and continues on foot. Wyndham is a photographer who came here to capture the solar eclipse. After taking a few photos and noticing that the day is coming to an end, he tries to return to his car but unexpectedly encounters a boy who seems lost and frightened. Wyndham is ready to help, but the boy doesn't seem to want it. He points in the direction where he lost his parents and walks away. Trying to help the boy find his way home, Wyndham follows him, but the boy rudely refuses his support and leaves. The man is left alone in the darkness, with no way to return to civilization. Wyndham lies down to sleep on the ground, but struggles to do so, reliving the day's events in his mind. Suddenly, he hears strange sounds. He follows the noise and soon finds stakes with ropes strung between them, from which hang bottles that produce a melodious chime in the desert. Before him is a large canyon, at the bottom of which stands a wooden house, around which a woman is wandering, singing a song. Wyndham asks for help, but she enters the house, as if not hearing his pleas. He finds an iron ladder leading down and begins to descend. However, the ladder only reaches halfway down the canyon, and from there, it's just an ordinary rope ladder. Wyndham overcomes both and approaches the house. He knocks persistently at the door, but receives no answer. So, Wyndham opens the door himself and enters. The woman, standing at the stove, greets him calmly, as if she had been expecting his arrival. She offers him dinner, and although he refuses, she serves him some soup and places it before him on the table. Wyndham is grateful for her hospitality, but continues to ask questions about how to leave this strange place. He tells her about the boy he met and asks for water. The woman, named Alina, suggests that he rest until morning, and Wyndham gratefully accepts her care. He lies down in the bed she points out, observing as Alina tidies herself and notes that she is young and beautiful. The next morning, he gathers his things and heads outside, hoping to find a way home. But strangely, he cannot find the rope ladder he descended the previous day. Without it, reaching the iron section is impossible. Wyndham returns to the house and, taking out his camera, takes pictures of the surroundings and the drawings on the canyon walls. Everything is quite gloomy and reminds him of death in all its forms. He then notices Alina, who is busy repairing the roof, and asks her about the missing ladder, but she either does not understand what he is talking about or pretends not to. Although her words imply that there are other residents here, she does not tell him anything directly. Disappointed, Wyndham walks around the canyon, periodically calling for help, but to no avail. Later, Alina asks him to undress so she can wash his clothes, saying it wouldn't be proper to return home so dirty. The man has no choice but to comply. That night, he struggles to sleep again, goes outside, and once again tries to find a way out, but there is none. In the morning, he searches the house and, finding a hammer, tries to climb the canyon wall. Suddenly, he notices a movement above, and then a chicken carcass falls down, causing him to lose his balance and fall. Wyndham regains consciousness in the darkness. His leg is injured by his own hammer, and he cries out in pain. Alina rushes to help him, but she does not answer his questions about the children he saw on the cliff. For several days, he drifts in and out of fever, unable to distinguish between night and day, unsure if he is truly seeing children around him. But the day of recovery comes. Limping, Wyndham makes his way outside. He demands that Alina tell the children above to pull him out of there, but she pretends not to understand him. She offers him to stay, promising to take care of him and ensure his well-being. But Wyndham doesn't need this. He wants to return home, to his work. He rudely pushes Alina away, rejecting any help. The man examines his leg and realizes that it will be a long time before he can use it fully. Suddenly, he hears voices from above and looks up to see the boy holding a little girl by the hand. The pair cheerfully ask how they can help, and upon learning that Wyndham wants to climb up, the boy promises to bring ropes and pull him out with his winch. But before leaving, he asks a rather strange question about Wyndham's favorite color. Wyndham replies that it's red and begs them to hurry. The boy and girl leave, and Wyndham checks his wallet in his pocket, not intending to return for his other belongings. Suddenly, a rope falls from above, and the same boy advises him to tie himself tightly, which Wyndham does. They begin to pull him up, and the man is already anticipating his rescue. But about halfway up, the rope stops. Dangling over the canyon, Wyndham screams, then tries to climb the rope himself, but lacks the strength and ends up hanging helplessly under the merciless sun. He regains consciousness from moisture, but when he looks up, he sees the boy spraying him with a hose, mocking the helpless man. Several other children appear on the cliff, ranging from very young to older teens. They are all dressed in clothes obviously taken from other people and behave inappropriately. Taunting Wyndham, they start swinging the rope, causing him to crash into the canyon walls, instinctively calling out for help from Alina. He sees the woman shouting angrily at the foolish children and loses consciousness after another blow to the wall. That night, he wakes up in bed and immediately tries to get up. Alina doesn't understand where he is headed, but Wyndham is willing to do anything to escape. The woman explains that the children are homeless, gathered in the desert together, surviving as best they can. Neither of them notices that while they talk, the children stand on the cliff, watching the house's windows burn. The next day, Wyndham watches as Alina releases a bird, envying its ability to fly. The woman brings him a spare set of clothes from somewhere, and although he didn't ask for them, he is touched by her care. Time passes. One day, Wyndham plants a small garden at the bottom of the canyon. Occasionally, the children bring them various items, food and drinks, which surprises Wyndham since there are no stores around. He doesn't understand their behavior. First, they feed him, then they mock him, but Alina accepts it all as normal. The man becomes more involved in the household, marveling at Alina's quiet demeanor. One night, he tries to ask her questions, which are interrupted by cries from the yard. Alina advises Wyndham not to go outside when the children behave like that, but he rushes out into the night and sees the boys, dressed in outlandish clothes, gathered around the house. They start taunting him, pushing and beating him, but suddenly disappear into the night. Wyndham demands answers from Alina. Who are these children? Why do they live here? And why does she stay in this horrible place? But the woman remains calm, not admitting that she is a prisoner. That evening, she comes to Wyndham. The man, starved for female attention, eagerly welcomes her. Time passes, and the first sprouts appear in Wyndham's garden. One day, the boy in the cap calls to him from above. He is friendly and promises to bring some soda. Wyndham returns to his plants and unexpectedly finds a wedding ring and car keys buried in the sand. That evening, Alina shows him a portrait of a woman. Calling her the first mother, she confesses that she is expecting his child. Stunned, Wyndham can't believe his ears. He never wanted to have children here, especially with a woman he barely knows. He yells at Alina, but he has no choice but to accept it. The next morning, he finds his garden destroyed by local birds, but Alina willingly helps him replant, which earns his gratitude. Gradually, life in the house falls into some semblance of order. Alina runs the household, and Wyndham exercises, working on his leg. One day, the boy in the cap visits again. He is very curious and asks Wyndham many questions. Wyndham asks him to help Alina, as she is going to have a child, and they will need a doctor. The man asks the boy to bring some rope and something heavy to use as a counterweight. He plans to climb out and take them to the city, where he can take care of the woman and the boy. The boy promises to do everything when everyone is asleep or gone, but then one of the older boys appears and takes him away. Later, Wyndham tells Alina that the boy wants to study, that he is smart, different from the others, and wants to live differently. The man wants to help him, and help her too, but Alina reacts strangely. She tries to find out exactly what Wyndham is missing here. When he mentions freedom, Alina is puzzled. After all, no one forbids him from doing anything here. Isn't that freedom? Then the man tells her about the outside world, remembering the ocean and a cheeseburger. Alina doesn't know what that is, so Wyndham explains what the dish consists of. The woman admits that her mother used to say that mirages live outside. But here, in the desert, everything is real. Wyndham takes out his camera and shows her the photos he took on the day he ended up here. But what impresses the woman is not the solar eclipse, but a random shot in the car with music playing in the background. At night, he has nightmares about the terrifying faces of the children mocking someone. In the morning, he hears Alina's terrible scream from the yard, and rushing outside, he sees the boy in the cap crucified over the canyon on wires. The savages stand on the cliff, laughing. The woman suddenly declares that brothers wouldn't do such a thing. She accuses Wyndham of killing her son and strikes him on the head with a board. When he comes to, Wyndham finds himself in a cage. Despite his pleas and begging, Alina has no intention of letting him go. She feeds him like an animal, and her children come to watch his suffering. One day, he sees a girl standing on the cliff. She is clearly not from here. Wyndham catches her attention, though he is terrified to shout, fearing to wake Alina. Whispering, he begs the girl to call for help. She understands him, promises to do everything necessary, and leaves, assuring him she will return soon. Wyndham waits in hiding, watching the heavily pregnant Alina as she goes about her chores. Suddenly, he hears screams and sees the savages catching the girl. They drag her to the cliff and dramatically kill her before his eyes. Time passes. Wyndham remains in the cage. He involuntarily witnesses unnatural rituals performed by Alina, her children, and her brothers. One day, he suddenly tells Alina that he wants to stay here forever, to raise his child and love Alina, who will become his queen. He will teach the child everything he knows and is ready to give himself completely. And this is his choice. But hearing the word choice, the woman laughs. He never had one. He is just a seed blown here by the wind. And this child is only hers. The man will stay in the cage until the baby is born. After that, nothing in the desert goes to waste. Finally, the day of birth arrives. Alina screams in the house as Wyndham paces in the cage. The woman reaches him, begging for help, as she has never had such a difficult birth before. She releases the man from the cage, and he does his best to ease her pain. The children stand on the cliff, watching what is happening. Suddenly, Wyndham sees a ladder descending from above, but Alina cries out, and he stays by her side. The child is born at the moment of the solar eclipse. Wyndham takes the baby girl in his arms and kisses her, overjoyed to be a father. Alina begs him to give the baby to her, and when she receives the child, she promises to feed and protect her until she becomes the new mother. Then she will fulfill her purpose, just as Wyndham has fulfilled his now. At that moment, the boy sneaks up and slits the man's throat, exulting over the collapsing body, assuring him that he is doing it for the mother. Later, Alina gathers Wyndham's belongings and packs them in a chest, then goes to the baby, promising her that everything will be fine. Meanwhile, Wyndham's body decomposes in the yard of the house, sprouting grass and turning to dust. This is where this unusual film ends. In the Middle East, a man appears who calls himself the Messiah and gathers crowds of believers in the new Advent. Is he sent by God, or is he a dangerous fraud seeking to disrupt the world's geopolitical order? The story is told through the eyes of people from vastly different backgrounds surrounding the enigmatic man. For 85 days, enemies have besieged Damascus, where a humanitarian catastrophe is growing. There is no food or water, and many people are dying in the shelling. And one day, two teenagers, Jabril and Samir, who have lost their families, see a man in yellow clothes on the street, urging people not to worry about the city's fall because God has predetermined that it will not happen. Salvation in the form of a sandstorm is approaching, and people run under the onslaught of the elements while the preacher does not leave and repeats that salvation is already close. The sandstorm breaks the supply chains of the enemy troops, and they retreat, and the city is saved. FBI agent Eva Geller watches the broadcast of everything that happened, paying attention to the strange man whom people call Al-Masih, and learns that he is leading hundreds of his followers into the desert. At night, the men talk about faith and religion around the fire. Al-Masih asks questions and is strict with those who do not want to think about his questions. Now all of humanity is on the brink, and for people to survive, they must cling to him. After this conversation, the man walks away from the people and stands for a long time looking at the sky, giving the impression that he's talking to God. The teenagers who came with him from Damascus remember how he preached while they hid in the basement, and suddenly Al-Masih calls one of them, Jabril, and tells him that each soul has its own star. He saw light in the boy, and soon Allah will lay a mission on him. Meanwhile, Eva is trying to find out which officers know something about the new Messiah and begins gathering information. Soon she learns that after walking 65 kilometers through the sands, the people reached the borders of Israel and stopped at the fence. Half of the followers believe that Al-Masih has led them to flight, but he orders them to gather all their weapons and bury them. He himself passes through the barbed wire fence, where he is arrested by Israel's border service. An agent from Israel's internal security agency, Aviram Dahan, is called in to interrogate him. However, the detained man refuses to reveal his real name, calling himself a messenger, and impresses the agent by calling him by name and revealing unexpected details from the agent's life that no one except the agent himself could know. Aviram is particularly touched by the incident with the boy that the Messiah reminds him of. Dahan completes the interrogation and leaves the room, destroying the video recording of the interrogation. He then goes to his partner to find out if he has told anyone about what happened in the desert, but his partner remains silent about it. As Aviram gets into his car, he suddenly sees a man with a bag over his head on the back seat, but realizes that it is a flashback to a tragedy from long ago. Early in the morning, the agent returns to work and is surprised to discover that Al-Masih has escaped from custody. Meanwhile, in the small American town of Dili, local preacher Felix Aguero greets his congregation, while the FBI decides to assist Israeli authorities in finding Al-Masih and discovering who he really is. This is why Eva Geller flies to Israel, and her insistence, Aviram is summoned to the office, but he cannot explain why he deleted the video recording. He behaves provocatively, not understanding why he should be accountable to the American woman. Meanwhile, an international conflict is brewing in the world as people who were led by the Messiah to the border of Israel are starving. Even after hearing about his escape, they decide to stay because they believe in his return. One day, volunteers bring food and water, and the Messiah's followers notice that the police are looking for someone in the crowd. They realize that Al-Masih has escaped, which causes unprecedented rejoicing. At the same time, Al-Masih delivers a sermon on the Temple Mount, using apocalyptic phrases about the end of history and calling on those who are willing to go to God's judgment to step forward. A young boy comes forward, but the sermon is interrupted by the Israeli police who try to arrest the Messiah. The operation fails due to a shot that hits the child who has come out. The people start screaming, driving away the invaders. But then Al-Masih lays his hands on the boy, who then stands up unharmed, showing the bloody bullet to the public. The people consider this a miracle while Al-Masih disappears into the crowd. Eva hears the news on the radio and asks to be taken to the scene of the incident. Meanwhile, Muslims also discuss the Messiah's sermon and are quite unhappy with his interpretation of Allah's teachings. The people in the camp cannot understand why their newly found Jesus has abandoned them. And Eva notices the surveillance, and her pursuer turns out to be Aviram, who wants to know why she's meddling in something that's not her business. But Eva is not going to back down. She studies the recordings from the CCTV cameras and notices the strange disappearance of the Messiah. And it's still unclear who fired the shot. She tries to find the injured boy while in Jerusalem the electricity is shut off to quell the unrest. The agents arrive at the boy's address, but it turns out that his family has left, scared of the crowd's interest. Reports of the incident on the Temple Mount are being shown around the world, and one of them is seen by Father Felix while his daughter Rebecca dreams of running away from home. Meanwhile, Jabril sees a flickering light at the fence and goes there, while Eva finds Al-Masih in a photo from Jordan. Palestinian girls bring food for the hungry and promise to help people. Jabril goes to get assistance when a man who appears hits him on the head and takes him away from the fence. That same night, the pastor's daughter Rebecca runs away from home, while her disillusioned father decides to burn down his church. The man takes a canister of gasoline and a lighter and heads towards the building. At that moment, a message about an approaching tornado comes to his phone, which was left at home, and the pastor's wife goes to find him. Sirens begin to sound in the town, and the residents hurry to the only shelter, the church, as the tornado begins its deadly circle. Father Felix calls his daughter, hoping she's nearby, and suddenly sees the motionless figure of Al-Masih nearby. Later on, a video of Rebecca's rescue appears in social media, which is intercepted by CIA agents and blocked from spreading. But how did the Messiah end up in America? Soon, Federal Agent Will arrives at the scene. The man is shaken by the sight of the completely destroyed town, where only one building, the church, survived, and where Al-Masih is currently located, explaining to the astonished priest that he came here by God's will. Felix is shaken because he was planning to burn down the building that ended up saving everyone's lives. At that moment, Agent Will enters and arrests the Messiah. The priest swears to get Al-Masih out of jail, while Aviram interrogates Jabril in the hopes of finding out the Messiah's whereabouts. But the boy does not know. The agent wants to understand why people follow the men unknown to anyone and promises to prove that there is no God. Meanwhile, Felix turns to a lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union for help because everything that happened was not a mere coincidence. And Eva arrives in Texas to question Al-Masih, but his lawyer manages to obtain a ban on the meeting. The situation worsens when one of the videos about what happened in the town circumvents their social media block and reaches the mass media. Al-Masih's lawyer tells him that while the charge of illegal entry into the United States is likely to be upheld in court, she can get him out of the federal immigration detention center where he's being held. When the lawyer leaves the detention center, Agent Will informs Eva of this and she rushes to see him. However, during their conversation, Al-Masih turns the situation around in his favor again by showing that he knows her name and sympathizes with her losses, as her mother and husband have passed away. He realizes his responsibility for those who followed him and is willing to help all who are suffering, including her, but Eva doesn't believe his sincerity and runs away, failing to notice the recording device under the table. Returning to her hotel room, Eva talks to her boss, who informs her that Israel is demanding Al-Masih extradition and the state prosecutor will seek permission for it. Later, Al-Masih is taken to court where he is charged, which he admits to, and requests asylum. Eva goes to the lawyer, trying to convince her to stop fighting for the man's release to prevent his extradition. After all, if he returns to Israel, he will be imprisoned, but the lawyer refuses to talk about it. Meanwhile, Aviram again refuses to reveal what happened during the interrogation, whose recording he erased. He's suspended from the case and a hearing is scheduled. At this time, Felix tells his wife about his departure because he's needed by the Messiah. A multitude of Al-Masih's followers gather outside the courthouse. The hearing begins and the lawyer explains that the man cannot return to Israel where he will be persecuted for religious reasons. But the prosecutor claims that the man is lying about being a Muslim because he does not pray 5 times a day as required. The Messiah responds that he belongs to all denominations because everyone walks under the same sun. This causes a storm of emotions around the world, even in high-level offices. The assistant to the President of the United States tries to pressure the judge to deport the unwanted man, and the judge promises to consider it. Meanwhile, Samir finds his friend Jabril abandoned by Aviram in the desert, and he considers it a true miracle that he survived. The next day, the court makes the shocking decision to grant asylum to Mr. Masih, allowing him to leave the courthouse as a free man, with the car of the Venerable Iguero waiting for him outside. People all over the world are talking about the Messiah and beginning to believe in the miracles he performs. In Dili, those seeking healing begin to gather. The Reverend tries to organize their accommodation while Samir faithfully tends to Jabril. The Messiah brought by the pastor settles in isolation from people in a small tent where only Felix has access. One day, the preacher dares to ask Al-Masih about his future plans, and he says he does not know what will happen next. After all, Felix brought him here. And this instills despair in the preacher's soul. He thought that the Messiah was acting according to a preconceived plan. That same evening, Agent Will comes to Eva and shows her a recording of a conversation with Al-Masih. Then he shows her a book by one of the radicals, Wallace, about cultural terrorism, in which the words of the Messiah are repeated verbatim. It turns out that Al-Masih is acting according to this scenario, the goal of which is the destruction of the existing order. Meanwhile, things are going badly for the refugees who remain at the Israeli border without water and food, and soon Samir begins to wonder where Jabril's strong faith comes from. He calls his friend crazy for refusing medical help as his injuries could be fatal, and accuses him of an abnormal love for the Messiah. One day, Aviram's wife notices his car, which has been parked near their house for 3 days, and begins to search for the man, who at this time arrives in Texas and buys a gun at the gun store. and in Delhi every evening people gather together hoping that al-Masih will come out to them. But the man remains in his tent, bringing Felix into a state of confusion that spills over into a sermon for all who have come. At this time, two residents of Delhi finally find their dog crushed by furniture during the hurricane and try to free it. Al-Masih comes out of his tent just as armed Aviram approaches it. The Messiah calmly looks into the eyes of his killer, and Aviram lowers his gun and looks at the departing man's back. The people notice the Messiah, who is walking towards the house where the man decides to shoot the poor dog as it is suffering greatly. The boy asks al-Masih to save his dog, but he takes a gun and shoots the dog, causing the boy's anger and pain, and then he leaves the town. At this time, Eva catches up with Aviram and he confesses that he wanted to kill the Messiah, who at that time calls pastor's daughter Rebecca to come with him. Meanwhile, the refugees decide that the Messiah has abandoned them and they decide to return to the city, but Jabril stays behind. In the morning, the young man dreams of his deceased mother, who turns into the Messiah and reaches out to him. At the same time, the Texas police ask the pilgrims not to come to Delhi as the city is completely destroyed. Dissatisfied, the people are ready to expel al-Masih and Father Felix. They write protest messages about the false prophet on the church walls. Meanwhile, Eva learns the true name of the Messiah, Payamgal Shari, and he has a brother who works at the university. The Messiah tells Father Felix that it is time to get on the road, persuading Felix that this is his destiny. The pastor decides to take his family with him, which upsets his wife but pleases his daughter. Father Felix leads a column of cars that follow the Messiah wherever he leads them. The number of cars is constantly growing, and soon it begins to count in the hundreds. Eva also returns to Texas to follow al-Masih, and one night sees him come out to make a call from a payphone on the street. At her request, Agent Will requests a copy of the telephone conversation. The next day, the column continues on its way. Stopping for a break, the pastor hears news of the crisis on the border, where the refugees from Palestine are still waiting for their fate. Rebecca takes a picture of the Messiah standing by a road sign in Washington and posts it on social media. In the morning, the column sets off, and Felix learns from the posts that their path leads to the US Capitol. At the same time, Eva checks everything she can find about the Messiah and comes across information that he studied at the same university where the notorious terrorist Wallace taught, whose book al-Masih quoted during the interrogation. Professor Wallace hacked the stock exchange and then fled to Russia during the investigation into his actions. This means that the case of the alleged attack is completely within Eva's jurisdiction. The huge column arrives in Washington and al-Masih goes to the Lincoln Memorial, while Jabril has a vision of his late mother and al-Masih. The Messiah speaks about the unity of people in the world around them, and Jabril suddenly stands up as if hearing his speech. Al-Masih asks to look at himself and his neighbors. Jabril strips naked. The Messiah stands before the nation and looks at them so that they finally look at him. It's too late to kneel, time is up. Jabril walks towards the border. Al-Masih heads for the water. Jabril walks non-stop until a soldier's gun barrel is pressed against his chest, and al-Masih walks on the water. The Israelis retreat, and Jabril leads the refugees. Hundreds of amazed spectators follow the Messiah's journey and record this on their telephone cameras. The world is buzzing after witnessing the miracles of al-Masih, and even the Congregation of the Causes of Saints is considering the case. Everywhere there are clashes between the followers and the opponents of the newly emerged Messiah. People are sending money to Father Felix, who intends to build the Church of al-Masih with it. Meanwhile, Jabril arrives in western Jordan, where he is welcomed as a liberator. The refugees are brought to a secluded house where they will be given food and shelter. But Jabril is separated from the others as he openly declares his allegiance to al-Masih. Meanwhile, Eva reports her findings to his superiors. The Messiah has a fairly long trail of connections to banned organizations and, most importantly, to Wallace, who is now hiding in Moscow. Senior officials in the US government are concerned about the popularity of al-Masih, so the head of the White House staff demands that the CIA do everything possible to discredit him. But Eva reminds them, this is not just terrorism, this is a new level of destabilizing society. Meanwhile, the society is discussing the Messiah with ever-increasing fervor. People are divided into those who unquestionably believe in him and those who consider him a false prophet. Felix preaches on behalf of al-Masih and reminds people of the importance of faith. The Lord has chosen them specifically, and it is important to understand why. At this time, a woman with a terminally ill child sneaks into the hotel of the Messiah, and the man agrees to take the girl, but only alone. However, his room is under 24-hour surveillance. Meanwhile, the young refugees begin to learn different sciences, among which religion is at the forefront. Sheikh personally comes to Jabril to understand the depth of his faith, and the young man confidently answers that he unquestionably believes in the Messiah. Meanwhile, Eva discusses the Messiah's water-walking feat with Aviram. After all, Jesus did the same thing. He performed tricks and attracted supporters. The man is impressed. She speaks like a true Jew. Agent Will continues to monitor the Messiah's room and one day witnesses a girl knocking on his door, praying for healing. But the man immediately understands the true purpose of her visit. The girl has come to seduce him. He reveals her soul, pitying the woman who sells her body, and from this her soul melts and dies. The girl admits that she was paid for the visit and cries from the moving words of the Messiah, who confesses to her the eternal love of God for his children. These words bring tears to Agent Will's eyes, who is watching the scene. At that time, Rebecca runs out of her parents' room and sees the Messiah escorting the girl out of his own room. The girl runs away and Al-Masih catches up to her on the street. He tries to explain her special place next to him, and the girl shares her observations that the world seems to be on the brink of something grand. The Prophet turns to Rebecca and asks her to do something unimaginable, and she promises to do anything he asks. Meanwhile, the CIA manages to find Al-Masih's brother, who reveals that their parents were of different faiths and died early. The boys were raised by their uncle, a professional illusionist, and Al-Masih always loved being the center of attention. The uncle was a tough man, but he taught the boys everything he knew: English, literacy, and most importantly, how to perform tricks. And at that moment, someone puts a dark bag over Al-Masih's head as he enters his room. The man finds himself in the office of the President of the United States, standing before the head of state and demanding the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from around the world using the president's sincere faith. The politician is shocked. It's simply impossible, since the American troops are used precisely as peacekeepers, and if they are not present, there will be chaos in the countries under their control. However, the Messiah lists the names of countries and cities where Americans have been waging wars. He offers the president the chance to go down in history as a true peacemaker saving the world. And he says that the history has ended and the world will soon start anew. Meanwhile, Eva learns that a few years ago Al-Masih was placed in a psychiatric clinic and goes to the college where the men studied. But the director can't remember anything particularly noteworthy except for his thesis. Eva goes to the archives, but the thesis is not there. In Jordan, the Sheikh shows Jabril an article in a newspaper about the miracles of Al-Masih and asks him to give a speech at the upcoming celebration. The boy must become the leader of the new generation in the struggle for Palestinian independence. The next day, Al-Masih announces to the media about his meeting with the president, and this infuriates Felix, who believes that he should have been informed about it. The president also faces similar attacks. He is heavily guarded against this freak, but he himself goes to the meeting. However, the man interrupts all conversations. He must first think about the people. Angered, Felix expresses his grievance to Al-Masih, and the letter suggests that he kneel before him if he truly believes that he is the Messiah. The preacher thinks it over as the Messiah leaves the room. On the other hand, Agent Will begins to unquestionably believe in Al-Masih and quits his job. Meanwhile, Eva receives the call logs she requested. That same evening, Aviram asks Al-Masih about his family and mocks him, offering to walk on water again. But the man only smiles in response and asks a counter-question: why isn't Aviram leaving? The agent can't answer. The president talks to Al-Masih again and he informs him that there is no more time to think. At that moment, water begins to flood the president's feet. Upon waking up, the man learns about an unprecedented flood destroying the U.S. coastline. Later, the daughter of the Reverend Iguero tells him that Al-Masih came to Texas for her, not for her father. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, a guard confesses that he was the one who freed the Messiah from prison, not Aviram Dahan. That same night, the girl hired by the president's assistant to compromise Al-Masih returns all the money she received for it. She doesn't care whether he's real or not. What matters to her is that he's a very good person. Meanwhile, the president flies over the affected areas and, in addition to providing material assistance, urges people to pray and hope for the help of the Lord. At the same time, the pastor's wife asks Al-Masih why he chose their family. He says that faith can be found everywhere, and he wants the same thing that the Lord wants: the flood. Meanwhile, in Jordan, the Sheikh is teaching Jabril about the speeches and Palestine's independence. It's very difficult for the illiterate boy to remember unfamiliar words, but the Sheikh is insistent. His friends are also being heavily influenced at this time, with religious ideas being drilled into their heads. Meanwhile, Reverend Felix asks a famous showman to include Al-Masih in his program. After all, it's a chance to speak to the multimillion audience. Eva checks all the numbers on the list and finds one that Al-Masih calls frequently and talks to the caller for quite some time. Meanwhile, the President of the United States is informed of the buildup of Russian troops on the border with Latvia and is demanded to make a tough decision. On that day, Eva finds Al-Masih to tell him that she knows about his diagnosis, Messiah complex, given to him in the psychiatric clinic, and about his uncle, the magician. She thinks someone is using him and promises to find and arrest the puppeteer. And he confirms that he knows Wallace, who is still his friend despite being accused of terrorism. After that, Felix tells Al-Masih about the invitation to television and he agrees, but only if the Reverend brings his daughter with him. In the evening, Eva talks to her father and is amazed to learn that her own father believes that Al-Masih is the Messiah of the end of times. Meanwhile, it turns out that the complex in the Badia is a terrorist training camp and Samira is being prepared for the role of a suicide bomber. Meanwhile, Eva decides to act on her own and dials the number that Al-Masih constantly calls. She hears Wallace's voice in response, so his theories about Al-Masih's connection to the terrorist are confirmed. But during the conversation, the man refutes all her conclusions. It's a pity, but she doesn't understand what's going on. And of the two of them, he is not the most dangerous one. The woman flips through his book again, reads the dedication on the title page and has an epiphany. Meanwhile, the president requests an analysis of full withdrawal of American troops from Eastern Europe. Eva goes to her boss. Wallace's book is the work of Al-Masih, so it's actually the opposite. The recognized terrorist is a disciple of the Messiah. In the meantime is the day of the television appearance. Al-Masih and Rebecca prepare for their performance. At the mosque, many believers come to listen to Jabril's first speech. The boy is very nervous, but the Sheikh is nearby and guides him. The show host warms up the audience before the Messiah's appearance on stage, while Samira is also being taken to the mosque. But just before going on stage, the Messiah leaves the studio and gets into a car, while Samira puts on the suicide bomber belt. The audience demands the Messiah's appearance and Rebecca takes the stage. Jabril starts his speech about the Messiah simultaneously with Rebecca, while Al-Masih is driving in Avram's car. The teenagers repeat his words to the audiences, "We are all one people." At that moment, Samir enters the mosque, shows the explosive device attached to his chest and raises the button. Looking into Jabril's eyes, he can't bring himself to press the button. However, Samir's mentor remotely activates the bomb vest. Rebecca suddenly loses consciousness in the studio. A powerful explosion rocks the mosque. The action moves back several years when Avram and his partner kidnapped, interrogated and killed an underage son of one of those who had organized an explosion in which Avram's mother died. But it turned out that the boy was not the man's son at all and it is still haunting the agent. In the present, he himself is driving the Messiah to the airport to deliver him to Israel. After the mosque bombing, the victims are given help. Unconscious Jabril is carried out on a stretcher. The same thing happens to Rebecca. Meanwhile, Eva Gela learns that Al-Masih has been kidnapped. The CIA tracks the plane on which he's being taken, unaware that it was all done on the orders of the president's assistant. Rebecca wakes up and tells her father that the Messiah is gone, and he will not return. Jabril wakes up in the back of a truck and sees a dead man next to him. He squeezes his hand and the fingers twitch under his palm. Eva finds out that the plane with the Messiah has taken off from a government airfield, and her boss tries to pressure higher-ups to find out the plane's destination, threatening to tell the president about everything that has happened and thus driving the country's leader's assistant into a corner. At the same time, in the sky, Al-Masih talks to Avram, persuading him to free his conscience because God still loves him, and that people always choose between good and evil, and the last thing he will see before he dies is the face of that boy. Meanwhile, the president's assistant decides to reveal Al-Masih's true name to the press and the folder with his dossier, highlighting his mental illness and the fact that he was raised by an illusionist. In the sky, the plane begins to experience severe turbulence. There is an explosion in the tail and Avram sees the face of the deceased boy in front of him, whose face is being covered by the Messiah's hands. In the command center, Eva is informed that the plane's signals have disappeared from the radar. She realizes that a tragedy has occurred. On TV, news reports reveal the Messiah's real name and biography, causing confusion among Alma's 6 followers. After hearing everything, Felix leaves the hospital. Jabril also watches Messiah's brother talk about his ability to perform magic tricks. Eva accuses the president's assistant of destroying the diplomatic plane, but he warns her to watch her tongue. The woman is overwhelmed because the entire operation has collapsed and she cannot prove anything. Meanwhile, Father Felix arrives at his church and sets it on fire. He no longer believes in anything. Meanwhile, Aviram wakes up in the middle of blooming poppies and sees the Messiah above him. Then a local boy appears before him, offering him a flask of water and enthusiastically stating that the man has performed a miracle. He resurrected Aviram and another man. They both were unquestionably dead, with gray faces and flies crawling over them. Then he touched them and they came back to life. The agent watches in amazement as his partner bows to the perfectly unharmed Messiah standing in front of him. The film is a story about the coming of the Messiah, the prophet, in the modern world. It is an interesting and easy-to-understand film with deep thoughts expressed by Al-Masih in conversations with completely different people, ranging from an illiterate boy to the President of the United States. On the one hand, it is a weird combination, but on the other hand, it is quite understandable as the Messiah claims that we all walk under one sun. A young man returns home and discovers on the carpet in the living room his own body. Next to it lies an envelope with the inscription, "Look at me." The initial shock is replaced by curiosity as Alex finds a flash drive in the envelope, which he immediately plugs into his computer and on the screen sees just himself. The second, Alex reassures himself he is not high and has not gone insane and advises to listen carefully. Thus, it all started with men in black coming to his house. Rebecca, an employee of a private scientific research institute of advanced technologies which cooperates with the National Security Agency of the USA, has a very tempting offer for Alex. But first, Alex must sign non-disclosure agreement, for which Rebecca offers a check for a substantial amount. Having signed the papers, Alex learns the story of an American unregistered satellite which the USA did not launch. Strangely enough to admit, the satellite is allegedly from the future and contains a coded message inside. If Alex agrees, he will be put to sleep and delivered to the laboratory. The institute knows that he is practically bankrupt and lives in a house inherited from his parents. To prove the seriousness of her intentions, Rebecca immediately transfers a large sum to Alex's account, which convinces him to sign the documents. The next day, he is put in a car, given an injection, after which he falls asleep and only comes to his senses in a closed, secret place. Rebecca shows him the laboratory where the satellite is already located. And the guy starts solving the task. 5 weeks pass, but there are no results yet. Rebecca suggests Alex take a day off, but the guy does not need it. One day he is visited by a vision in which a young woman decodes the same task. After that, Alex bleeds from his nose. Later he finds the name of this woman written on the frame of the bed. Soon, Alex manages to decrypt part of the code, which contains drawings of an unknown device. Rebecca announces the end of his work and informs him that he will be taken home. Alex comes to his senses at home late at night. He feels ill, which he attributes to fatigue and stress. But after a few days, the malaise intensified, and he began to be haunted by persistent hallucinations. And one day, 2 strange-looking men appear on the threshold of his house, wanting to know why he agreed to decrypt the code. Alex does not understand because decryption is just his job, which pays well. The men continue to press Alex with questions about morality. Don't the consequences of his work bother him since the device to be created from the decrypted drawings will be the most powerful weapon in the world? Alex's head starts to hurt and he asks the men to leave. They thank him for the answers and leave. Alex immediately feels better and sits down at the computer, but at that moment, a call comes from Rebecca reminding him of the signed non-disclosure agreements. An indignant Alex realizes that the institute is watching him, and when he again sits down at the computer in his house, the lights go out. Alex goes outside and suddenly sees one of the 2 men who came to him with questions on the opposite side of the street, but the man's body starts growing before his eyes. Frightened, Alex runs home and looks out the window to see the giant's hand reaching for his window. Alex extends his hand to meet it and morning comes. Rebecca, who has arrived, finds Alex at work. He tries to explain that humanity lives in two-dimensional space, and his recent guests are a highly developed civilization that exists not only in space but also in time. They can be in this room but earlier or later, and they can watch what is happening through some kind of window in time. Alex tries to convey to Rebecca the danger of the device they are building, which can start World War III. Then the woman informs him that she knows about his illness, a brain tumor. The guy blames the institute, which placed him in a room with a radioactive satellite, causing a tumor to develop in his brain, and insists on stopping the construction of the device. Alex, in the present, pulls his dead body out of the house and buries it in the forest, then returns to the computer and continues to listen to the story from his future self. Alex, in the future, regrets that they did not want to listen to him because he understood that something ominous was coming. Then he remembers the woman. She is cryptographer. Alex finds her address, but Beth refuses to talk to him. Alex shouts that he is dying. He has 6 months left. After that, Beth opens the doors and informs that she has 2 years left. She also realized that it was a weapon, and the drawing supposedly came from the future. There is another person, Schieferman, who communicates with her through the computer and sends her tasks, which she solves when she feels normal. Beth starts feeling unwell, so a man takes her to the bedroom, while he goes downstairs, where it seems like he sees the girl's life in the mirrors. There she is, saying goodbye to her beloved in military uniform. There his comrades inform her of terrible news, and there she is with a handful of pills in her hand, trying to leave this life. But then his attention is captured by a message from Schieferman appearing on the computer monitor. Alex responds, but Schieferman quickly realizes that it's not Beth and disconnects. The man then grabs a pack of printed papers with tasks previously given by Schieferman. In the morning, Beth finds him on her sofa, with the papers glued together. The guy points out to her that all this are pieces of a puzzle which, when assembled, can give an answer. Schieferman clearly doesn't work at the institute. Alex asks Beth to help stop the creation of a death machine. The girl reports that she fell ill specifically after working with the satellite. She started having hallucinations and began thinking about a message from the future. What if it's possible to contact the sender? She began to hear the voices of the dead and one day heard her own voice. She also saw aliens, though she doesn't believe in them, and asks Alex to leave. Alex goes home, where people in black are waiting for him. Rebecca orders him not to meet with Beth anymore and urges him to use the remaining time wisely. Angered, the guy sends the guests to hell, and upon entering the house discovers that all his papers with conclusions have disappeared. Meanwhile, Beth sees a bright light at her house, which makes her feel sick. The woman screams in fear and tries to hide. Alex tries to drown his thoughts in alcohol when a message from Schieferman arrives on his computer. The guy is sure that Rebecca is hiding behind this nickname, but the interlocutor denies it. At that moment, the doorbell rings. Beth is on the threshold. It turns out that Schieferman directed Beth here and sent her the blueprints of a device capable of destroying the technology from the future. The couple begins developing a virus capable of destroying the machine being created from the blueprints they decrypted through the computer. But the next morning, Rebecca bursts into Alex's house. Representatives of the institute know about their work and are already on their way there. She gives the name of the institute's founder and orders to go to him as soon as possible. She is Schieferman and hope to destroy the device with their help. Then cars approach Alex's house. The couple escapes through the back exit. Rebecca is caught, given an injection, and thrown into a car. Meanwhile, all the gas burners in the kitchen are opened. In the evening, Alex and Beth arrive at scientist Miles, who immediately recognizes both of them, as he has always followed their work. The thing is, this satellite was not the only one. There was another, which orbited Earth for about 400 years. Apparently, unknown beings from the future were waiting for Earthlings to grow up, fly into space, and be able to decrypt their message. The ancient satellite also contained blueprints of a machine whose purpose was to limit the evolution of humanity within the third dimension. But when Miles announced his discovery, he was laughed at. He also developed a tumor, luckily not fatal. He is sure that aliens are capable of existing in several dimensions. They do not perceive time in a linear form as humans do. And the second device, which is now being created at the Institute, will likely provide them access to the human dimension. So far, they are like watching a videotape where humans are movie characters. With the help of the first device, they can watch this movie but cannot change what is happening. But the second will allow changing the existing reality. Miles is just beginning to understand the essence of this process, but cannot explain everything completely. After all, even the appearance of the aliens is formed by the human brain itself. And by the way, he has been in contact with a huge alien visible only to him, living in his garden for more than 30 years. Miles constantly looks at it, causing his brain to adapt and begin to see the true appearance of the humanoid. But his guests see no one. Miles is sure that the tumor in their heads is the aliens' help so that people could perceive their reality. Alex suggests simply smashing the device with a hammer, but where is the guarantee that they will not restore it in the Institute? So all data on the server needs to be erased, although no one even knows the location of the Institute. But Miles reminds that he is one of its founders, and he pulls out a map with a detailed plan of the Institute. At that moment, a loud bang is heard at the door. The couple runs away, while Miles tries to calm down the raging alien. Alex and Beth hit the road and soon find the Institute's building, where they open a hatch through which they sneak inside. There they separate to increase the chances of finding the laboratory. Alex witnesses the strange behavior of a guard who constantly returns backward and realizes that time inside the Institute is looped. Beth also falls into this loop. Realizing the futility of her attempts to go further, the girl activates the bomb. But because of the time loop, she is unable to leave the dangerous place. Alex goes into a dark room and tries to carry the bomb further when he is overtaken by an alien and literally disintegrates the man into small particles. A minute later, Alex finds himself tied to a table. Opposite him sits a humanoid. Alex thinks he has died, but the alien denies his belief. They are simply curious about the human appearance and their experience of time. Linear time for aliens is incomprehensible and tedious, a labor-intensive cycle of empty beliefs. Humans are like in a trap, forced to constantly go through the same thing. Aliens, on the other hand, exist outside of time and space. They are in every moment. Therefore, causal connection and sequence of actions for them is a mystery. What will happen if a human no longer has to wait for something? Alex realizes humans will become similar to the appearance of aliens, but the familiar personality, the ego, dies in the moment. The alien is surprised. Death is natural, but man hides and distances himself from it. Time determines everything for a human. It is both a giver and a thief. A human sees the world as he imagined it, and what will happen when the source of projection disappears. Even with the eternity of self-analysis, man will not understand the difference between reality and illusion. With each newly born, a new reality comes. Therefore, a person always stands before choice. Alex feels very bad, and then the alien offers to return to the moment before the guy got sick, with the information he now has. Alex decides that he would not have gone to work at the Institute and would have stopped all this. The alien is surprised. Why would he change his behavior if he's not able to change the situation? And then Alex admits, people do not choose what will happen. The humanoid insists, will his return to the past make a difference? Can something change? And immediately, the guy finds himself in his home, in front of the computer. He records this flash drive, realizing that nothing can be changed. The world may disappear tomorrow, but this is not news. Everything has already happened. Everything ended before it began. He puts the flash drive in an envelope and falls to the floor. The last words on the flash drive are about Alex in the past, warning Beth, and he drives to the girl's house, while Alex from the future, in his last words, asks to forget about everything and live on. Quite an interesting movie that makes you think, what if the concept of time really does not exist, and we live only here and now in one single moment? Who made us believe that there is a past and a future? And is it true that a person does foolish things, not thinking about how his thoughts and actions change his own future? Friends, write your opinion in the comments. The film takes place in the small town of Vengenberg, where a young girl named Jennifer lives with a skewed face and a disgusting hump in the family of a cowman. Because of her ugly appearance, the girl is constantly mocked by the locals, and one day when Jennifer is once again mocked by a couple of local young men, the girl accidentally opens a portal to the magical Tor Lara in Aretuza, where she's met by the young wizard Istrid. The guy is concerned. All magic leaves traces, which wizards can use to find someone who has even an ounce of magic in them. He decides to save the budding sorceress and opens a safe portal that brings Jennifer home. Time later, a beautiful and wealthy lady arrives at the farm of the girl's father to buy a pig. But upon seeing the girl, she expresses a desire to buy her too. And the father, who does not hide his disgust for his daughter, sells her for half the price of the animal despite the pleas of her mother, who recognizes the lady as a witch. So Yennefer finds herself in the magical school of the enchantress Tissaia of Rees, where several girls are already studying. At first, Yennefer takes the separation from home hard and how low her father judged her. She even tried to commit suicide, but when classes begin, she discovers that the young wizard was right. It was her inadvertent wizardry that caused the wave and caught the attention of the school's rector, the wizardess Tissaia. The girls who study at the school have also distinguished themselves with the same unique skills. Soon Tissaia holds the first test. The girls must lift a stone and a flower without touching them and using a spell. Everyone more or less manages to cope with the task, but Yennefer fails. The girl stubbornly tries again and again until Tissaia stops her. Frustrated, Yennefer runs away. Later, she finds Istrid in the cave and tells him her name. Sometime later, Tissaia trains her female pupils to recognize man's greatest fear. She sees the girls in pairs and orders them to look into each other's eyes until they get inside their rival schemes. Yennefer pairs up to encourage the girl, but she again fails. Tissaia is enraged. Yennefer is useless. And this is because she's lying to herself. Even if she were a beauty, no one would love her. Although she's not the only one to whom she has problems, Yennefer shares the problems with her only friend, Istrid, who talks about her schooling. He too was having a hard time with everything. The boy offers to read his mind, and the girl succeeds. One night, Tissaia wakes the girls in the middle of a storm and takes them to the Tor Lara, the most powerful magic place in the continent, entrance to which is only open to members of the Wizard Brotherhood. Today, there will be a test in the art of controlling the flows of chaos, which requires catching lightning in a bottle. The girls do not believe in such a possibility, and some get strong discharges even after catching the lightning. Yennefer's turn comes, and she reaches up with the bottle, but it is thrown back against the wall. Enraged, she directs her power at her more fortunate opponent, Tissaia, blocking her mental blow. Later, she reprimands her apprentice she almost killed today, which means that her emotions can ruin her own. Tissaia cannot be sure that Yennefer will not go along with her feelings and harm his school, for she's to become a court sorceress, and the weak have no place near a ruler. The enchantress already doubts that there's anything in her that the wizarding chapter needs. Frustrated, Yennefer tells Istrid everything. But most importantly, the enchantress knows all about them and they won't be able to see each other again. The guy is willing to show her other, more ancient and powerful magic, but it is very dangerous. He shows her the skulls of the dead elves who built Aretuza. They were the first wizards of the continent, and they were the ones who built all the magical places. But humans came to the continent and slaughtered them. Istrid gives her a flower that can only grow where the elder blood rests and reads a spell, which by repeating it the girl opens a portal. The astonished wizard does not understand how she managed to do it the first time, and Yennefer confesses that her real father was a half-elf who died in the purge. It was his blood that made her ugly. The boy kisses Yennefer and confesses his love. Later, she shows Tissaia the flower. It turns out that this was her assignment, to get the plant by applying the skills of false emotion. Yennefer hopes to be elevated. The enchantress promises that she will soon hear a knock and know when it is time. Meanwhile, Istrid is also reporting to his mentor Strigobor about what he has learned about the girl. One night, Yennefer hears a knock at her neighbor's door and, taking the flower, goes after them. She peeks out as Tissaia turns the four of them into eels. The enchantress knows the girl is here and orders her to come out and push her former fellow students into the water. They are now the conduits of magic for Aretuza. Yennefer performs this and then sees many silhouettes of former schoolmates in the water. Time passes. Yennefer enjoys a love affair with Istrid, applying what she has learned to enhance the effect of intimacy. Thus, one day she created a whole crowd that watched her intimacy and then rewarded the lovers with applause. The guy is amazed at her imagination. What will she come up with next time? So the day of the final rite is approaching, after which they will be masters of their own destiny. Yennefer dreams of graduating from Aretuza and returning to her native Aedirn as a powerful sorceress to show her longtime abusers and her father what she's been able to achieve. In addition, all Aretuza graduates are perfected before being sent to the different kingdoms. All physical defects are removed, which awaits Yennefer as well. The wizard in charge shows her his work, the flawless beauty of the graduates, and promises her an equally wonderful result. He suggests making her color a noble but strong gray. Tisai, on the other hand, teaches her to look in the mirror and see what Yennefer herself wants. She orders the girl to close her eyes and imagine the most powerful woman in the world. Yennefer complies with the order but does not yet see the promised beauty. Meanwhile, the chapter of wizards gathers in Aretuza to decide where their graduates should go, for all kings need court wizards. Then it transpires that one of the leaders of the council, the wizard Stregobor, knows that Yennefer is a quarter elf, which means that she will not be accepted at Aretuza, where there is a prejudice against elves. The chapter vows to send Yennefer to Nilfgaard, which the aspiring enchanter does not like. She demands an audience with the chapter, but Tisai declares herself in charge of the distribution. Yennefer is beside herself. She has no intention of wasting her life serving the king of a small southern kingdom and a lover of women. The tutor reminds her of the elven blood, and the girl understands how Stregobor knew about it. The initiation ceremony begins, which Yennefer does not attend. Worried, Istrid finds her behind a letter to her father asking him to confirm that she's his own daughter. The boy does not believe that this letter can convince the chapter. But the girl simply does not know what to do, for even if Istrid disproves his words about her origins, no one will believe him anymore. The enchanter is frustrated. He didn't know why Stregobor needed this information, and she has already missed all the initiation spells. Istrid suggests that she should go with him, for he has been offered to become an explorer. They can travel the continent and discover the unknowable. But unexpectedly, the girl cruelly ridicules his plan. She's not going to dig through the dust of the ages at all, and these are his dreams and intentions, and her opinion, as always, he does not even ask. Istrid is shocked. Yennefer is not at all what he thought she was, and he expresses his opinion that she's angry because she missed her chance to find beauty. But a girl needs power, and she didn't experience so much hardship studying at the magic school for nothing. Yennefer runs to the enchanter, who is in charge of perfection, and demands to show her art. Not even the lack of a potion to dull the terrible pain that accompanies the transformation process stops her. As the magician begins the process, Yennefer asks for her eyes and the cut marks on her hands as a reminder of her former weakness. And the wizard informs her that every magic has a price. Having been reborn, she will not be able to walk. But the girl agrees to everything, even to the removal of her womb necessary for a complete transformation. The magician reads spells, and the girl screams in terrible pain and rips the chains with which she was tied to the table. Her spine straightens, her entire body seems to melt and shift from one form to another. Finally, writhing in pain, Yennefer loses consciousness. Meanwhile, in the main hall of Aretuza, the initiation ball continues. Suddenly, Tisai sees a door opening, in which stands an unusually beautiful girl with violet eyes. She realizes that Yennefer has disobeyed her orders and hurries to take her away. But it is too late. The Aedern ruler has already noticed the beauty. He invites her to a dance where he expresses his desire to see her as court wizard in his kingdom. Tisai has to retreat and only watch the dance of the king and the enchantress from afar. Directed based on a series of books by Sapkowski, The Witcher is quite curious, fascinating and vivid. The atmosphere of magic, the world of monsters and steel swords transferred quite well, so the adventures of the female protagonist will be even more exciting in the next episodes. At the beginning of the movie, we see an experienced fisherman heading out to sea. Like thousands of times before, he casts his net from the boat, but something goes wrong and the net gets caught on something on the ocean floor. The fisherman dives down, but he can't make it back to the surface as a huge school of fish surrounds him. Charlie, a lighthouse keeper, calls her colleagues in Germany to discuss current affairs. She's interrupted by a signal on her monitor and rushes off to investigate. Charlie has to swim to the duty boy to dive into the water and retrieve a sensor that somehow got tangled up in fishing nets. Strange things are also happening in Canada. Leon, a young whale researcher, is called to Vancouver's City Beach, where a giant killer whale washed up a couple of hours ago. After examining the animal, he heads to the fishing dock to find out who among the poachers caused serious cuts to the killer whale. An old fisherman takes Leon to his boat and shows him the bitten side of the vessel which was used to try and overturn the killer whale. Leon doesn't believe this story, but the man is sure that the fisherman wouldn't lie to him and that they had to destroy the whale to save themselves. Charlie and her new friend launch a repaired sensor into the ocean, tasked with tracking marine animal population. They notice methane ice fragments around the boat which often rise to the surface, but today there are too many of them. Leon finally hears the whales and learns that they have been seen in various locations along the coast. Before heading out to sea, he calls his girlfriend Lizzie, who has already taken tourists on her boat to see killer whales in the wild. A giant whale appears next to Leon's boat. After freezing for a couple of minutes, the giant disappears underwater, but a whole pod of orcas takes its place. Lizzie takes the tourists onto the deck and everyone watches in awe as the whales appear. The humpback giant also appears next to the ship and the tourists are able to see it up close. The strange behavior of the whale pleases everyone except Leon, who tries to warn his friend but is too late. The next trick of the whale hits the metal of the boat. Leon arrives at the scene of the accident and tries to save those who survived the hit, but now a pod of orcas is hunting for the tourists. Leon is unable to save Lizzie. The action shifts to a French restaurant. After gathering fresh seafood at the market, the chef plans to prepare lobsters, but one of them shoots an unknown liquid into the man's face. After wiping his face, the chef continues working, but by evening he and two other cooks begin to feel ill. The chef passes away that same evening and the two young cooks are taken to the ICU, waiting for the test results to determine what happened. At the same time, a Norwegian ship in the sea lowers a camera to study an unusual phenomenon, an invasion of ice worms. A few specimens are brought to the surface for study, and the scientist finds a new peculiarity. These creatures have jaws and reproduce several times faster. A commission is formed and everyone agrees that they have discovered a new species of worms and bacteria. Leon talks to the owner of a fishing boat who is also a witness to the humpback whales attacking other boats the day before. In addition, Leon is shown another anomaly. The bottom of the ship that returned from the sea is covered with a thick layer of mollusks which has never been seen before. A group of scientists launches a sampler onto the seafloor to check the soil where worms were found, but due to a methane leak, an explosion occurs. The ship manages to survive, but the team is greatly frightened. The scientists are not only scared of the mistake during the operation, but also the results of the test. In addition to the worms on the seafloor, there are bacteria that eat ice and can reach the very bottom. Jess records a video message to Charlie when something strange suddenly happens and alarming readings appear on the monitors. The water under the ship starts boiling and something pulls it down into the depths. The action shifts to Venice. A young man in love reads poetry on a bridge when suddenly the book falls from his hands and ends up in the canal. The couple immediately forgets about the poetry book because before their eyes is an even stranger sight. Thousands of giant jellyfish rise to the surface. Analysis of the bacteria from the infected chef reveals a new strain that feeds on blood cells. It turns out that several more people have died after visiting the restaurant on the coast. Leon requests permission to perform an autopsy on the killer whale to find out how pollution affects whales and whether this could be related to changes in the behavior of these giants. There is nothing inside the whale that could scare the experts, but Leon finds an unknown substance in its brain which is sent for analysis. Another victim of infection appears, a young man from a car wash. By putting together all the events, the scientists understand that the bacteria spread from the restaurant through the water supply system. Leon is informed of new cases of whale attacks. Looking at the map, the guy finds a pattern. All the changes occur with the whales during migration. To verify his suspicions, the guy sails to the place where the whales are resting during their sleep. The dive almost ends in tragedy, but Leon manages to install a camera on one of the whales and get out. Sigurd finds out that the Japanese have also found the worms, but they are not in a hurry to report it to the world. Recordings from the cameras are checked in 2 laboratories at once. Leon's footage shows that the whale pod descended to the very bottom, where they were met with strange glowing. Far from the events, a new incident occurs on the coast. Hordes of crabs crawl out onto the streets of a small village. Another shot of the seabed finally lifts the veil of mystery. It turns out that one of the oil and gas companies was drilling ice in a forbidden place and damaged the seabed for several kilometers. Leon has to sneak through a fence to get to the guarded port area to collect a few more mussels for analysis from the ship, but he is caught by security and arrested. In the morning, Mr. Sato, the Japanese owner of the ship, contacts Leon. He asks the guy not to trespass on his territory in this way again, but promises to provide access to all materials for study. Charlie only now receives the message recorded by Jess a few minutes before the tragedy. When the emotions subside, the girl manages to notice some peculiarities on the recording. For example, a glow behind a porthole. crabs are being delivered to the laboratory, which have started to emerge on the surface in different parts of the world. As expected, they too are filled with a strange substance that absorbs blood cells at an incredible speed. Charlie is reviewing the video repeatedly, not understanding what else is wrong with it. Finally, the girl's hearing catches a sound that is very similar to the sound from the deep-sea recording. The girl contacts the laboratory and shows them a part of the recording that caught her attention, but her stern boss, Katerina, rejects all the scientists' ideas, considering the sound on different recordings to be just random noise. She orders Charlie to finish up the work and shut down the station for the winter without coming up with incredible theories. But after cooling down and carefully considering Charlie's words, Katerina still decides to test this hypothesis, and a helicopter with a group of scientists and a deep water device arrives on the island. The device is delivered to the island by Sigor, and after handing it over to Charlie, he's about to leave. But at the same time, emergency messages come to the scientists on the mainland. They are only able to reach Sigor and inform him that a terrifying tsunami is approaching the coast. Those who see it with their own eyes realize that there is no chance of survival. Sigor manages to warn Charlie and they leave. At the conference, scientists give a report that the discovered bacteria intentionally infect humans, and soon everyone will have to flee far away from water sources. Leon tries to warn his fishermen friends about this, but none of them are ready to live on land, choosing to die in their familiar environment. Rahim meets Leon at the institute to participate in a scientific conference. The best minds gather to discuss what is happening, and most agree that there is some force at work that wants to drive people out of the ocean. Only Katerina is against everyone else. She refuses to abandon the knowledge and convictions gained through years of experience, so she orders the group to seek a logical explanation based on science. Despite objections from their mentor, the group of scientists presents their theory to the public, convincing the government that marine inhabitants infected with bacteria are intentionally attacking humans. They even give the new intelligence a name, the However, such a version only elicits irony from top officials, who also suggest finding more scientific solutions to a problem than negotiating with an unknown intelligence. Astrophysicist Samantha Grove comes to the scientists' aid. Unlike politicians, she carefully studied the report and agrees that the strange sound on different recordings has all the characteristics of an unfamiliar world language. In addition, her team managed to capture the exact same signal from Antarctica. Another influential person, Japanese Mifuno, also believes in Sigor's theory and agrees to finance his venture, hoping it will help to save the world. Sigor assembles the team and informs them of the start of the mission. He suggests everyone think carefully and assess the risks, and those willing to go all the way will be waiting for an expedition to the Arctic in 48 hours. The scientists go home to say goodbye to their loved ones and warn them of their departure. The relatives of many try to persuade them to stay, but everyone understands that this is their last chance to fix something. According to scientists' calculations, the largest accumulation of intelligent bacteria is located in one of the valleys in Antarctica, where they could have lived for millions of years prior. The company is preparing to establish contact, and everyone is playing their role while giving interviews to a young journalist. Finally, the equipment on the ship starts buzzing with interference, and the scientists prepare to capture a signal from the mysterious organism. Sarah, Mifuno's assistant, sits down next to Leon at the table and confesses to him that she would have never believed in their theory if it weren't for her boss, who has proven over many years that his intuition never fails. Samantha is devising a plan. She intends to add a sound of a human child scream to the organism's audio signal and return the recording to the intelligence to show that they are ready to communicate. Charlie asks a colleague to take her with him in the diving apparatus to the bottom. The ship drops anchor and the scientists begin transmitting the sound message. Meanwhile, the daring couple gets into the capsule and prepares to dive to the depths. The whole team is eagerly awaiting any reaction, and finally movement appears on the radar and the sensors pick up a sound signal. The team from the capsule tries to contact the captain's bridge to report that their fans are malfunctioning and they are running out of oxygen, but communication is not working. The chief pilot, Luther, is ready to return, but Charlie notices some movement and turns off the lights, waiting to see what happens next. On the ship, they also notice something approaching. Sigor insists that the captain recall the submarine, but they can't reach the group. Luther doesn't want to risk anymore and he lifts the boat. On the ship, a hatch opens to receive the capsule into a special compartment. Charlie notices a strange glow appearing around them at that moment, but she doesn't tell anyone about it. Meanwhile, Samantha reports that they have managed to establish contact. The sound signal has returned and the child's cry has been altered as a sign that the bacteria understood the message from humans. Dr. Chase is looking for a way to cure those who have already been infected by the bacteria. Luther tells the journalist that he saw nothing at the depth, and everything Charlie saw was probably a figment of her imagination, just like the whole idea of intelligence. Nevertheless, Samantha tries to decipher the messages to assemble them into a response signal that the intelligence will understand. While staying in the compartment with the capsule, the journalist notices a glow in the pool. The lights on the ship go out and interference begins. When everything is restored, the captain sees the journalist's body fallen on the monitor. Chase tries to save the girl, and on her lips she notices a liquid resembling cerebrospinal fluid. Samantha tells the team and the captain that during the voltage surge there was a signal surge and it was so low that no one heard it. But most importantly, in the opinion of the astrophysicist, it originated from inside the ship. Charlie listens to what her colleagues are saying, but she never musters the courage to tell them that they brought the bacteria into the pool. Leon visits the girl, whose body has become covered in strange spots. The doctor asks the guy and Sarah for help. They must hold the girl while she takes a sample of the spinal fluid for analysis. The doctor tells the team about the results of the analysis. The substance previously found in marine creatures was discovered in Alicia's spinal cord. Chase believes that bacteria were attempting to merge with the girl's cells, and Charlie admits to seeing the glowing enter the ship with them. Samantha records a new message for the this time including an audio image from the astrophysicist. Charlie goes down to the sealed compartment without permission, and the pool starts glowing again, creating unusual shapes with the light. At that moment, Samantha receives a response message from the entity, which also contains an image. Mr. Mifuno's helicopter lands on the ship as he wants to be present for the opening. Sigor shows him the recording from the pool cameras and the image sent in response to Samantha's message. According to the astrophysicist, they have an image of the super ocean that surrounded a supercontinent millions of years ago. According to the scientists, the reminded them that they were, are, and will be on Earth much longer than humans, and all they want is for the oceans to be left alone and not destroyed. But there is good news. Since the entity is responding to messages, the team has a chance to negotiate and reach a ceasefire. In the meantime, Chase devises a drug that can destroy bacteria that consume blood cells. This news creates disagreement within the team. Mifuno plans to test the substance in the pool, and if it works, completely destroy the Sigor disagrees with this, at least until they confirm that they cannot negotiate with the Chase tries to take the middle ground and suggests trying the drug in the pool but not rushing to launch it into the open ocean. Everyone gathers to watch the experiment. Chase launches the drug into the water, which immediately begins to rise, emitting a terrible scream that shatters the glass. The captain is informed that nothing is working on the ship and they are simply drifting in the waters of Antarctica. But worse, the ship is surrounded by icebergs. The vessel collides with an iceberg, but unexpectedly a blue glow takes it somewhere else. The captain orders the engines to be started to break free from the control of the He also doesn't understand why they don't pour all the drug they have on board into the water. But Sigurd tries to explain to the captain that everything that happened now is the price for his thoughtless experiment in the pool, and no one in the world will manufacture enough of the substance to destroy worldwide. The only way out is to make a truce. While the team is deciding how to negotiate with the entity traps the ship between the icebergs. Charlie hurries to the capsule to descend and deliver Luther's body to as a sign of complete obedience. Once at depth, Charlie changes her plan. She injects leukocytes into her heart that can merge with and opens the capsule door. The body falls under the control of and the icebergs release the ship, while billions of lights envelop the girl underwater. Later, Charlie brings the ship to a deserted island. It opens its eyes and looks at the sky with glowing blue eyes. The series ends here. Please write in the comments what you think about this series.